Well, and I think that it's symbolic of something in reality. I think that's why it's there. I mean, I think if you study nature, I think there's fractals everywhere. I think our brains have evolved to detect those patterns.
And that's the question that really gets to the root of it, right? With this circuit 6 is like, is it reality? Like, is it something that's actually there, or are our brains just making patterns of the chaos?
You are tuning in to The Multiversity, a podcast for higher dimensional education.
Join us as we explore philosophy, science, history, and the great unknown.
Hello, and welcome back to The Multiversity. Today we're doing part 2 of our 2-part series about the 8-circuit model of consciousness, invented by Timothy Leary, popularized by Robert Anton Wilson. Our discussion is going to be based on the book Prometheus Rising and will be a continuation, as I said, to our previous week's episode. If you haven't watched our episode on circuits 1 through 4, introducing the concept of circuits and discussing the 4 first ones, go check that out first. It's a great conversation. Without further ado, Katie, do you want to recap us on the first 4 circuits and introduce us to circuit 5?
Sure, I would be happy to do that. So circuits 1 through 4, we thought were going to be kind of simple to cover, but once we started covering them, we realized that there was a whole lot to dig into on every single one of these circuits or processes of the mind, maybe you could say. Circuit number 1 is the oral biosurvival circuit, basically your survival instincts, your basic instincts to eat. Circuit number 2, the anal emotional territorial circuit, which is exactly what it sounds like. Dominance, submission, territorialness. Circuit number 3, the time-binding semantic circuit. This circuit is not as easy to understand just based off the name, but basically what it's referring to is systems of language, systems of logic, and the reason they call it time-binding is because in this circuit, this is where you first start to recognize time, past, present, future, and create logical systems. And then finally, we ended on circuit 4, which is the moral socio-sexual circuit, which basically governs morality, right and wrong, sexual norms in society, taboos, all that good stuff. So moving on from the first 4 circuits are kind of like your basic lower level circuits, maybe a little bit more animalistic or basic level, and then 5 through 8 are going to be a little bit more complex, getting into things that take some self-reflection and some practice to access. And the first one we're talking about is the holistic neurosomatic circuit. The Circuit 5, holistic neurosomatic circuit, is imprinted by ecstatic experience or via biological or chemical yogas, as Robert Anton Wilson says, basically modifications of the mind. It processes your neurosomatic feedback loops, psychosomatic systems, somatic sensory bliss, if you feel high, if you have an experience like faith healing, things like neuro-linguistic programming, alternative medicine, things that kind of trick you into triggering your own placebo effect. Basically, any kind of mind-body connection is what this circuit governs. So that's my brief summary. How did you guys understand this circuit?
Yeah, so my understanding was that this circuit regulates, as you said, kind of the placebo effect, kind of faith healing, kind of like, I'm going to concentrate, I'm going to focus on feeling better. And then this mental focus that I have is going to translate into a somatic bodily effect. And Wilson says that you can access this circuit using cannabinoids. And so I guess that's why it's becoming more and more popular these days, where everybody's stressed out and anxious.
It seems like the 5th circuit is a lot about peak experiences. So the kind of experiences of oneness or unity or feelings of ecstasy, elation, all of these kinds of things that come through yoga and breathing practices and that kind of thing. It seems like that's what it ties into a lot.
Yeah, it's I like the state of bliss, like mind body connectedness. I think part of this circuit kind of gets into the idea that a lot of illnesses are on some level psychosomatic. So like when you have like an ache in some part of you, it in some way is isomorphic to like something that's happening in your mind. And when like you're able to like completely clear your mind, your body, you're able to completely clear your mind and your body, there's some kind of feedback loop between the two.
What was that term you used? Isomorphic?
Yeah, isomorphic means that is the same shape that repeats itself in different mediums.
Yeah, it means like analogous.
Maps on from one medium to the other.
Yeah, like a map is isomorphic to the territory. Or if I like take a bite mark out of something, then my teeth are isomorphic to that shape on a more literal level.
So Wilson mentions in the book how, say, with Jesus going around casting out demons and healing people, maybe what was actually happening was he was giving them a kind of contact high. So because Jesus felt so good all the time, he's in this high state of elation. When he came into contact with people who were sick, their endorphins get running just by mirror response or whatever it is. These kinds of things seem like miracles to us today because they're so uncommon, but maybe they're actually entirely understandable through chemical processes.
Has anybody been the recipient of an energy healing or Reiki or something along those lines?
Yeah, my grandmother's really into that kind of stuff.
Could you talk a little bit about that? I don't have any experience with Reiki, but I feel like that's I hope I'm not insulting to the field by saying that it seems like faith healing.
I don't know a lot about Reiki, so I don't know if I'm in a good position to really talk about it. I think when I was the recipient of it, when I was younger, I was pretty skeptical, and that kind of probably blocks a lot of I don't know, like there's a few different ways to look at it, right? Because one way of looking at it, like kind of what Kurt just outlined with Jesus, is this idea that it could be just the placebo effect. And we know that the placebo effect is actually extremely effective. Like it was probably one of the most effective forms of healthcare before modern medicine. And that many illnesses can be fully healed with the placebo effect. And it's not controversial. It has taken into account in every scientific medical study and so on. So there's the idea that it could be the placebo effect. And if it is, then being skeptical would probably negate any positive benefits. There's also the idea that maybe there's some way the energy actually is being redirected on some subtle electromagnetic level. And I don't really know enough about the practice to speak to that, but it doesn't seem completely implausible to me.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that this circuit is dependent on you believing that using this circuit for positive benefits in your body is dependent on you believing that it's going to work. And so that's why it's called faith healing, because you have to have faith that it's going to work. And then, the placebo effect does its thing. That's what the placebo effect is, of course. When they do, randomized controlled drug trials, what they do is they give, the control group a placebo. And a lot of times that group has a lot of positive effects because they're like, oh, I'm getting this drug that's going to be helpful and it's going to fix me. And but you have to, in order for the drug to be proven useful, it has to have a greater effect than the placebo effect.
Yeah, and I think like Reiki practitioners and stuff would claim that they have something going on beyond the placebo effect. I think that's where it gets into there's some uncertainty.
Well, but the reason for that is that, that helps put you in the state of mind where you believe it's going to work. If you're just sitting there going, I'm going to will myself into healing, then the effect isn't as strong as if you're thinking, oh my God, there's some kind of energy field that's healing me. That the second one would be much more powerful than the first.
I mean, from the perspective of it being entirely the placebo effect, that is a valid point.
Right. Interestingly, even I've seen studies, even when people know that they're taking a placebo, they still receive some benefit. Probably because people know that the placebo effect works. I wonder if you could go a layer deeper and try to survey people who did or did not believe that the placebo effect was effective. But even if people know that they're receiving a treatment that doesn't have any benefit beyond the placebo effect, they feel slightly better from the placebo.
Yes, I think in some cases, even if they disbelieve in the healing that they're going to receive, they can still get an effect from the placebo.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the placebo effect is probably like not even conscious. Like probably even like the process of like meeting up with some kind of healer figure and taking a pill or going through that ritual, like probably primes your body for healing in some way.
Yes, they also say that the more invasive the healing, so if you get an injection or something, then it's more likely that you'll get a greater placebo effect compared to taking a pill.
Yeah, there was this really famous case of the placebo effect where there was this surgery they used to do on people's knees, I believe for a form of arthritis. And there was two kinds of surgeries, and they would cut in and cut a ligament, and I forget exactly what it was, but it was a knee surgery that was considered to be the standard treatment for this form of arthritis. And this doctor wanted to compare the two kinds of surgeries. So what he did was he took a group of people with this arthritis. He gave some of them the first surgery, some of them the second surgery, and some of them he just cut open the skin and sewed it shut, which is not a surgery at all. And he found that the ones that had the fake surgery had healed just as well as the ones that received the surgery that was, millions of people had undergone, that was being prescribed for everyone else.
Kind of terrifying to think about it, but it's also kind of amazing to think about that, because I feel like the power of the placebo effect is really unharnessed in mainstream medicine. I don't know, like there's plenty of alternative practitioners that will tell you to say your positive affirmations and believe that you're going to heal and try to meditate and focus on the area of the body that you want to be healing and envision that. But I feel like as a culture, we don't practice that sort of thing enough.
Yeah, and maybe more people will start doing that now as culture moves more into this fifth circuit.
It's interesting because there's almost like a paradoxical thing, like with Vervaeke talking about beliefs versus enactments. I'm wondering if like that kind of conscious process of like feel better, feel better, feel better. Like I wonder if that actually would be effective, or if it could even create like a counter program in the subconscious of some kind.
I think it depends how you do it, because sometimes people say if you're doing affirmations, it's like somebody who really believes something doesn't have to do affirmations. So it's almost like you're affirming the opposite. But it depends on your attitude. And it's also, I think sometimes once you do affirmations enough, even if you're initially skeptical, eventually you'll start to believe in it. Then you have to override that initial hump.
Well, I think it's more about the belief and about the feeling and less about the actual repetition of affirmations or something along those lines. It's more about the intention and the embodiment of actually believing that you're being healed.
Right. But they can go together, like one can lead to the other, that sort of thing.
I think this is related to when Wilson talks about brainwashing and how, so we're talking about, healing. So that's a positive way to use this, but there's also negative ways to use this, where he talks about, basically if the prisoner or the captive or whatever starts pretending to buy into the captor's philosophy, then they can start kind of saying these things out loud. And the act of saying something out loud, if you do it enough, kind of reprograms your brain so that you actually believe what you're saying instead of, just mindlessly parroting it or pretending to, So the more repetition you do, the more you can actually sort of convince yourself into that new reality tunnel.
Yes, and it also it ties into what Robert Cialdini talks about in the book. The power of persuasion, or the psychology of persuasion, where he talks about people being brainwashed in camps, like say in a communist Chinese camp or something, and these American soldiers would be submitted to these competitions, and they say like, okay, well, we'll give you a pack of cigarettes if you can write the best essay about the benefits of communism. And they all did it because they all want the cigarettes. But then later they have to look back on that and say, well, hang on, I wrote this essay about how good communism is, but I only did it I didn't really do it for the pack of cigarettes because that's such a small reward. And so they feel more like they have to be consistent with what they've put on paper. So it's commitment and consistency.
Yeah, that reminds me of
power of identity. Yeah.
sorry.
No, go on.
So that reminds me of my schooling, where a lot of times I'd be have an assignment to write an essay about something that I was either ambivalent about or I disagreed with even. I didn't have to do that very many times. A lot of times it was the structure was open enough so that I could sort of pick which thing I wanted to write about. But yeah, a lot of times if you wrote the wrong thing, you knew what the teacher really wanted to hear. And if you wrote something that was counter to what the teacher thought, you knew that you would get a bad grade. And so I do think that schools are in some form a kind of brainwashing facility. And so I think that's one of the techniques they use.
If you have a bad teacher.
Yeah, I've definitely had teachers that rewarded me for writing about controversial things.
Yeah, I definitely had as well. I appreciate that I had teachers who explicitly made a point to be neutral and evaluate you on the strength of your arguments and not whether or not you were arguing for what they believed.
Yeah, but I would say that the majority of teachers are not like that, especially in sort of poorer schools.
Probably. It takes a certain amount of mental practice and self-awareness to be able to do that. We're kind of getting into the interactions between Circuit 5 and Circuit 3 there naturally, talking about how you can use, well, sort of, we weren't talking too much about logic, but you were talking about how if you write an essay, you're creating these arguments, and then the people in the camps, for example, would want to feel consistent with their arguments. There are certainly ways to brainwash yourself into feeling and being healthier.
Yes, exactly. I think it's interesting how this circuit can. I think it's the first circuit. Going in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think this is the first one that you hit where it's capable of reprogramming the other circuits. The first 4 circuits seem to kind of interact once you have a reality tunnel or a worldview established. They all kind of know their part, and it's hard to change them. But then once you kind of zoom out a little bit and you go into this circuit 5, it helps you kind of reprogram the other circuits.
I guess the way that circuit 5 would reprogram would be by, if you go through a bodily action of something, it can change your imprints of the lower circuits, I guess.
Bodily action? How do you mean?
Well, I mean, you kind of gave the example of like writing an essay, or let's say I go to the gym every day, then that's kind of like just going through that ritual. Like, even aside from the benefits I'll get from working out, it'll send a message to my mind and to my body, and it'll get me to like think and feel differently. Mm-hmm. It'd be like a placebo around that.
Well, it wouldn't only be a placebo message. It would also be, maybe this is what you mean, it would also significantly impact your neurochemistry to the point where you would probably use more happier logic because you would have different neurotransmitters floating around.
Right. Yeah. I guess there's like there's 2 levels of it.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note also that this circuit requires your other circuits to kind of be quiet in order for you to kind of hear what this circuit is telling you. Wilson says that this circuit is partially analogous to Jung's intuition function. But you can't really hear what it's saying unless you turn off your survival circuit and you kind of quiet down your survival and your dominance and your rational circuit. And so that's why things like meditation and things like cannabis can kind of get you into this circuit, because it puts you into this kind of parasympathetic nervous system mode, as opposed to the sympathetic, parasympathetic being kind of relaxed and sympathetic being kind of fight or flight. So you kind of have to get yourself out of that fight or flight state in order to access this circuit.
Right. So by sitting in meditation, you're actively telling your body, hey, there's no threat here. Everything is cool. Everything is safe. So we have time to heal or have mind-blowing experiences, feel happy or elated, and that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, so maybe this is why sort of the people who are socioeconomically underprivileged tend not to be able to access this circuit because they're constantly in that survival mode where they're constantly trying to get money so that they can survive and eat. And so it tends to be people who are kind of a little bit better off to even access this circuit and be able to reprogram themselves. So I thought that was interesting.
That does kind of tie in with what I wanted to bring up, was the way that this circuit can kind of be unconsciously hijacked. We've been talking about how you can reach this circuit intentionally through meditation and peak experiences and ways to hit your placebo effect and try to positively impact yourself. But also, if you're under a lot of stress, if you have a significant amount of anxiety, if you're angry all the time, or your body is tense, that can affect your mind and actually affect your health and manifest in all kinds of real health symptoms as well.
Yeah, a lot of times you kind of get locked into that fight or flight response, and there isn't really a rationalization behind it, but you don't know that there isn't a rationalization behind it because you don't have time to think about what the rationalization is. And so a lot of times you have to get into this kind of upward cycle where you go into your body and then you reprogram your mind, which reprograms your body, which reprograms your mind. And yeah.
So I know some schools are starting to teach mindfulness meditation, like as early as kindergarten. So I think that will have huge effects on culture in the long term, and people will be able to access these kinds of states of being.
Hopefully so. I know there was a point in my life where I really didn't put any stock into this kind of mind-body connection. I didn't really think about how stress was affecting my health. And at one point in time where I was extremely anxious, I actually ended up having a ton of food allergies and also allergies to latex and various plastics that were, at first I thought that maybe I was imagining them and that was part of the anxiety, but they were real. It got to the point where I was breaking out in hives, where I would touch certain things and my fingers would puff up to where I couldn't bend them. And then as I calmed down by altering my situation, all of those allergies dropped off one by one.
To what extent do we think that physical illness is caused by stress and other psychosomatic issues?
I think it's a huge effect, basically. I think if you're stressed out, then as Katie implied or suggested, it can cause you to have worse reactions to negative stimuli than you would otherwise have. So it basically makes you less resilient and more sensitive, which in turn kind of can spiral downwards and cause you more stress, and which can cause you more inflammation. So stress and inflammation are kind of both things that can make your general health worse in this kind of synergistic effect. Or you can reduce your stress and your inflammation kind of synergistically as well by relaxing and practicing, giving your body some TLC, basically.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of negative direct effects of stress on the body, but then there's all these knock-on effects like losing sleep and then maybe comfort eating or something like that. So you won't exercise as much because you're so stressed. You feel like you don't have time. There's a whole bunch of things that can happen. So it's not really clear how far-reaching the effects could even be.
I don't think that all illness is caused by psychosomatic symptoms or anything like that, but I do think that we underestimate it, or tend to underestimate it. One way that helps me understand it now a little bit more is that our mind and our emotions are bodily functions, and when we're feeling something like stress, that's something chemical going on in our bodies, and those chemicals also affect other things in our bodies other than just our emotional sensation. And like stress in and of itself is a state where the body is on alert and really ready to react. It's kind of like everything on overdrive and everything but emergency systems shut down, and your body being in that state for a long period of time, it's not recovering like it normally should be.
Right. You have to go into that parasympathetic state so that your body can heal. Your body doesn't, when you're only thinking about short-term considerations and you're in fight or flight mode, your body is not thinking, oh, I should heal. It's thinking, I need to deal with this situation that's a threat to me right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically, it's like a fire, it's like burning your reserves. Eventually your reserves run out and you just can't do that anymore.
Chris, when you say parasympathetic, what does that mean exactly? What's the definition?
So I tried to explain it before. I can look it up if you want the exact definition, but basically the fight or flight mode, the panic mode,
right,
where you're, caffeine kind of puts you in this mode. It kind of like, it amps you up, right? You're ready to fight or you're ready to flee,
Yeah.
Parasympathetic is just the opposite of that. Parasympathetic is like
when you're chilling,
when you're meditating, or when you're sleeping, or when you're sleeping can kind of work and it kind of can't. Like you can definitely sleep in like a sympathetic mode where you're still kind of in fight or flight even though you're asleep. And you'll wake up and you'll be like not rested.
Right.
So there's a precise definition of it. I can look it up for you if you want.
Okay, that's cool. Ariel, what do you think? How much does stress and feeling good and this fifth circuit, how much does that affect our health or our sickness?
I agree with what you guys have been saying, because probably there's almost certainly a lot of illness that is not directly caused by stress. Like a lot of what you guys have been saying are really accurate. Like the sympathetic and parasympathetic they're two parts of the autonomic nervous system, and there's different like physiological states associated with each one. Like one thing is like if you're in the sympathetic mode, which is like the stressed out one, your blood goes to your limbs, like away from your internal organs towards your limbs. And the idea behind that is if you're like being chased by a tiger or something, you want to have your arms and legs be like as strong as possible. Because that's why you get situations in like emergency situations, like people, like you'll get like someone like lifting up a bus or something crazy like that. It's because they're in that sympathetic state. But you don't want to live in that state because then your organs become starved of blood. And that makes it where like your digestion isn't as good. Your stuff on the inside, it's damaging over time to your organs. One thing I was wondering is, we're talking a lot about the relationship between stress and health problems, which I think is pretty well established. But I would almost wonder if there's other like psychosomatic states or other states of being that also over the long term are either positive or harmful. Like it just occurs to me that there's probably something between like chronic stress and like, circuit 5 neurosomatic bliss. Like what are other states? What are the other states that our bodies can be in?
Well, one thing that I found interesting, there was a documentary about happiness that I saw on Netflix a long time ago. I need to look it up. But according to them, and I verified this, but I don't remember who did the study, but your social connections, how connected you are to a community, was just as predictive of longevity as basically any other factor, like diet or even whether you smoked or not. So I found that really interesting. I'm not sure exactly what emotional state that correlates to, but there is a specific feeling when you're in a happy situation with a bunch of friends or family. And that seems to have overwhelmingly positive effects.
Right. This goes back to when we were talking about Circuit 1 and how, money has kind of become this societal replacement for communal bonding or communal connection, where you need that in order to feel safe, in order to feel in order to feel like you're going to survive, basically, in order to feel like you don't need to worry about anything. You need like this social support group. And this is why historically things like ostracism and exile have been such a big punishment, because basically if you got exiled from your community in the old days, you had to go forage for yourself in the wilderness, and you didn't have a very good chance of surviving. So I would definitely say that's a very strong part of the human psyche.
Well, I wonder about, like, if you just feel neutral, is there a neutral human experience, or that's between that stress and bliss. I think if you actually felt neutral, there's probably a few different interpretations of it, because if you felt neutral, you could say you felt empty, which is kind of like numb, kind of like almost like depression. But if you felt neutral, just slightly towards the bliss side, then that's like you just feel chill, totally calm, like the Buddha or something.
Yeah, we're probably wired to experience neutral as bad, just because like of the realities of entropy. Like nothing ever stays the same, and if you do end up in a situation where things are unchanging, then they'll slowly degrade. So probably we're wired to be dissatisfied with neutral.
Right. There is no stasis. Stasis is breakdown.
Right. Yeah. The other thing is that I don't think we really stay in one, parasympathetic or sympathetic, or, becoming and being. I don't think we stay in any of these states for any length of time, because just sort of stagnation makes us feel anxious. When we're breathing, sometimes we're breathing in and sometimes we're breathing out. And I would say a neutral state of breathing would just be, you're in between breathing in and breathing out. Yes, you pass through that point, but I don't think you stay there for any significant length of time.
For sure, moving back and forth is a useful thing. And there's like no stress is also bad. Like there's a word like eustress. It's like the idea that a certain amount of stress increases your intelligence and your motivation and stuff like that. Like it's the same thing with exercise. Like we happen to live in a society where we don't tend to not get enough exercise, and we tend to have too much stress. So it's all about reducing the stress and increasing the exercise. But like, like a coal miner, is it like they're like, if you're getting there's such thing as having too much physical exertion and having your body completely break down too. It's just how it happens to be in our society.
Right. And the crazy thing is that the less you work out and the less you experience that eustress, the more you'll kind of stagnate. And the more you seek comfort, the less comfortable everything will make you get. So, the more you seek out discomfort, the more comfortable you'll become with things. And so, the less you go into that sympathetic nervous system where you're a little bit stressed in sort of a good way, the more stress you'll feel just by being neutral. So
speaking of seeking comfort, you're kind of reminding me of the conversation that we had in our previous episode about people who get in a loop with the oral biosurvival circuit with things like comfort foods. I think that when people get caught in seeking comfort through sugary foods or like quick fixes like that, it's probably a sign of an underdeveloped circuit 5. They're not able to access this circuit in order to bring themselves health and peace. So they hit themselves with a little bit of a sugar high.
I wonder how that connects to like it makes me think about cannabis addiction, because they're often compared, right? Like people often compare opiates and cannabis, and in some ways they seem like you get really chill and you eat a lot of snacks. I'm wondering, how do you, because Robert Anton Wilson talks about how cannabis activates circuit 5 and opiates activate circuit 1, and I'm just kind of trying to figure out in my mind, like, why do you guys think it is that some people seek out a lot of cannabis and kind of overdo it on the cannabis? Like, what does that say about their relationship to circuit 5? Maybe the nature of circuit 5 itself.
I think, as you implied, so opiates can kind of put you into that, can kind of calm your circuit 1. I think that cannabis does something similar. It puts you into circuit 5 by calming all of your lower circuits. And so I think people who would otherwise might be highly addicted to opium if they were to use it a lot, or opium or opiates, I guess. Since cannabis is seen as sort of a more socially acceptable drug than heroin or morphine or OxyContin, or actually, I guess maybe they're about equal in terms of how they're seen by society. But yeah, I mean, I think either one can kind of put you into that calm state, where if you don't try to if you don't try to transcend the drug and you just think of it as, I need this drug, then you can get locked into addiction. Whereas I think, if you're using cannabis as kind of a tool to quiet your other circuits so that you can reprogram them, then I think cannabis can be extremely helpful and not addictive in a harmful way. But if you're just kind of using it as a crutch, and you're not progressing at all, then I think that's where people get stuck.
Well, one thing that might put it into a bit of perspective, I asked the question, how did Wilson use cannabis? And I know one way that he used it was he would write out an entire draft of a book or a chapter or something, and then later he'd get high, smoke a little bit of weed, and revise the whole thing and rewrite a lot of it. And then he'd go back and write another draft sober and keep doing this process back and forth until every passage, every sentence filled him with delight. Now that's it's not like it's hard to classify that as a kind of addictive behavior. It's not like a pothead. It's like he's very conscious about his use of the drug.
Right, exactly. He's not using it as a short-term consideration. He's using it as a long-term tool. He's not using it as a crutch. He's using it as a tool.
So I think that with any drug, especially when you're talking about cannabis and psychedelics, they're kind of like a shortcut for putting you into certain very powerful psychological states. And I think that maybe where people can get stuck is if they just take that shortcut, but they don't use it to learn the path or use it as a tool to reach higher states than they otherwise might have been able to. Instead, it just becomes, like you guys have been saying, it becomes a crutch. You just feel like, okay, all I need to do is smoke weed, and then I get to this place of calm, but you're never actually teaching yourself to soothe. You're never actually practicing accessing your circuit 5. You're just, you found a magic bullet.
Right. I think that things like cannabis and meditation, if you do them you can do them wrong, basically. And you can use them as kind of relief from your stress and anxiety, but you can, it's possible to use them such that you never actually get to that state where all of your circuits are quiet, and then you can just listen to your 5th circuit.
What do you think about cannabis, Ariel, from this perspective and from like a neurobiological perspective?
It's really interesting because cannabis, it does kind of bridge these two. It seems like it's good evidence that the 5th circuit actually exists, as Robert Anton Wilson describes it, because it sort of bridges these two elements. Like it makes you feel like kind of blissful in a way, like blissful and very embodied and very in touch with your body, and more like lighthearted and creative in a way. But it also has all these effects where it seems to straighten out parts of your body that are unwell. Like it has, like people always, like it's very trendy to talk about all the health benefits of cannabis, and there are a lot of health benefits, especially to like taking the whole, the smoking the whole flower. Like it's like taking a cannabis flower that has like a variety of cannabinoids and smoking it instead of isolating any particular cannabinoid. Like when you take it as a whole, it does bridge those two, the mind body elements of circuit 5, which is really interesting.
I was going to ask, what do you know about people who experience paranoia with cannabis?
It's often, okay, that's a big question. There's a few ways to look at it. Like one thing, another gift Timothy Leary gave the world is this distinction between drug set and setting. So it's the idea that a drug experience is determined by your mental set, your physical setting, and the drug that you take. And so those are kind of the 3 different ways you could look at paranoia. One way to look at it is a lot of cannabis strains these days have been bred to be really high in THC and to be lower in other cannabinoids. And that kind of high THC imbalance definitely produces the kind of cannabis effects that can lend themselves more easily to paranoia. So that is something to watch out for. But the other 2 can have an effect too. Like if someone is prone to paranoia or they're an anxious person, then they might want to stay away from cannabis, or at least from certain kinds of cannabis strains, because it is a known side effect. And the setting can have an effect too. Yeah, I think there is a deeper answer though, so maybe I just need a minute to think about it.
Well, so another thing that Wilson talks about in terms of all the circuits, including this one, is that you can have a negative imprint on your fifth circuit, and people who have a negative imprint on their fifth circuit tend to have things like paranoia and sort of schizophrenic symptoms, hallucinations, and all that. So, yeah, if it's not done properly, as Ariel was saying, if your set and setting are wrong, or if your dosage is too high or something like that, then you can definitely have a negative experience.
I mean, here's the thing about cannabis, like just like this, all the stuff we're talking about, like stress and eustress and stuff like that. Like, I feel like definitely in the past when I've smoked cannabis, I've had times where like I smoke cannabis and I think about my life and it just seems like completely like scary and unmanageable in a way that it didn't when I was sober. And I think part of it is like we're talking about this fifth circuit activation and how it's like connected to like this parasympathetic like calm that kind of washes over you, and it seems like there's something about that where it does seem like a lot of people seek out cannabis to kind of quiet the sympathetic, like an overly active sympathetic system. So like they get stressed and they smoke and they're calm, and they get stressed and they smoke and they're calm. And so it ends up in a kind of a feedback loop where without the cannabis, they're just like chronically stressed. And when they're on the cannabis, they're just totally like parasympathetically dominant. And maybe they're just going through those extremes. Like you never hit the eustress, like the kind of normal level of like being a little bit stressed. Because like being a little bit stressed is like being capable and like feeling like you're able to take on the world. And I can sort of see maybe like this is kind of all speculation. I don't actually, you could test for this, and I don't know if this is an actual, would be supported by the science or not, but I could see like smoking cannabis and just having like all your eustress wiped away. So it's like you're completely in parasympathetic mode. And that might be a state where you feel less capable of dealing with the world or of facing the people around you, possibly.
I know I think a lot of people have had this experience of meeting somebody who smokes a lot of cannabis and then they try to quit, and you see suddenly your friend isn't as calm as you thought they were. They're actually intensely irritable and they get annoyed at everything. And I think it lends some evidence to what you're talking about, because it's like these people haven't got used to dealing with any form of stress.
Yeah.
They're so out of practice.
Right. I mean, when you access these higher states, you have to use that experience well. Otherwise, it'll imprint negatively. You have to use it in order to, again, sort of reprogram your lower circuits into a more adaptive state, so that you can use those circuits when you're not high in a more effective way, so that you're not stressed out all the time. If you're just like, I'm stressed, I'm going to smoke weed, then you're never improving your ability to deal with the world. You just got this crutch that you're dependent on now.
I wanted to briefly touch on Robert Anton Wilson when he talks about imprinting the fifth circuit. He says that it's imprinted specifically through ecstatic experiences. So that's kind of like these peak experiences. I don't know. Probably some people can reach those peak experiences through weed, but I think it's more common through meditation or prolonged chanting or ritual or psychedelic experience. Does anybody have a better definition of a peak experience? It's kind of difficult to get at.
Well, the term is so broad that it's difficult to say. But I'd say, like, I've felt very happy while taking cannabis, so that can be a peak experience, I suppose. It's though it might be a low form of one.
I think the term peak experience can apply to multiple domains. I think the basic idea of peak experience is this metaphor that we're like this vibrating wave, and that we're like vibrating at a certain level. And sometimes if we get a very large wavelength, you can hit a certain height in whatever metric you're talking about that is beyond your normal experience. And then that can guide a way to like raise your vibration onto, it can provide a path for making that your new normal. So you could talk about peak experiences in a lot of different domains, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I think what they mean by peak experience is that it's just a better experience than anything you've had previously. And then, that provides this impetus for chasing that experience in the future, because, you can live your life just trying to avoid bad experiences, but you're going to be very directionless if you do that. If you have peak experiences, then that gives you this, oh, I should do that again. That was good. So it provides you this motivation to something to strive towards in your everyday life.
What would a negative imprinting of a peak experience or an ecstatic experience look like?
Well, I know there's one example my friend told me where he had a friend who was very Catholic, and this practice among Catholics that I've seen them do where they say, like after a prayer, they say something like, "I am not worthy," which seems to me very strange, but that's what they do. And so this young lady had this intense religious experience. Like, I don't know the exact context. It's like she was in the middle of a prayer, and then suddenly, like everything in her brain lights up, like she's feeling really alive and everything. And then she gets on the floor and she starts saying, "I'm not worthy. Like this is too good for me. Like I'm a pitiful wretch, and I'm not worthy of divine experience." So I think that could be the thing you're talking about.
That's really interesting that you bring up somebody being raised Catholic and having a peak experience and thinking, "I am not worthy." I had something similar to happen to me the first time I did MDMA. I remember having that exact thought. I remember being like, "Man, this is way too fun. I see why it's illegal." And then I was like, "Whoa, why did I just think that?" And that led to a very positive experience for me. So I had the opposite experience that I kind of realized. I was like, "Whoa, why should I think that? What kind of like crazy programming do I have where I think that like there's a certain level of fun beyond which like I just shouldn't have?" So I realized there was sort of a flaw in my thinking, and I got beyond that.
Yeah, maybe to generalize a bit, it seems like a negative imprinting could be if this circuit is imprinted in the context of like a lower circuit complex. Like you're talking about these examples of like Kurt's example almost seems like someone who's imprinting it in a way where it's reinforcing like a submissiveness, or we were talking before about examples of people who are like chronically stressed and self-medicate with cannabis. Like that seems like a circuit 1 dysfunction that's being kind of almost using circuit 5 to treat a circuit 1 dysfunction instead of just being able to appreciate it fully for yourself.
One thing that came to mind for me also was the concept of a bad trip, and how a traumatic bad trip or a traumatic first ecstatic experience might negatively affect somebody going forward if they were thinking about altering their state of consciousness in order to work with their mind-body connection. They might be scared off of that entirely, or they might develop such negative emotional associations with that kind of a mental space that perhaps they wouldn't be able to positively impact themselves.
Yeah, right. So, actually, that makes me think of something else. So I think a lot of people who are either manic or psychotic, I think they're probably getting, if they've recovered, and then they start to feel those sensations coming on, or they start to feel their thoughts racing or whatever it is, they start to think in a very different way. They'll be like, "Oh, hold on, I'm going to step into crazy territory. I better watch out." And they'll pull themselves back from it.
Yeah. And another thing I think might lead to negative imprints is when you get into this fifth circuit, when you quiet everything down, the way that you do that is you have to convince yourself that you're safe. And the reason why you have to do that is because healing is, you're very vulnerable when you're healing. Because you're not paying attention to threats in your environment. You're specifically, you have to go somewhere where there are no threats objectively. Otherwise, what can happen is you can get into this very vulnerable state, and then some threat emerges, And then because you're so vulnerable, the event is much more traumatic than it would have been otherwise. And so I think that can be you've let your guard down, right? And then something bad happens, and that kind of trains you to like even more to not let your guard down. So I think that can be how negative imprints happen.
I don't know. Like I sort of have I don't know if my interpretation of Circuit 5 is exactly the same as that, because I feel like there's an element of Circuit 5 that's not only healing oriented, but growth oriented. Like the ecstatic, the bliss, the not only reaching some previous norm of health, but like achieving new levels of health. Like there's something about it that's growth oriented and exploratory. So I'm not entirely sure it has that necessary connection with safety that you're laying out.
I think it absolutely does. I mean, I think, playfulness and exploration do not happen in environments which are full of threats, precisely because you have to pay attention to the threats. Once you don't have, this is why when you're a small child, or when you're a parent of a small child, you want to provide a safe environment for your kid to explore and learn. Otherwise, they're not going to explore and learn. They're just going to sit there and be afraid of everything. And so I think something similar is happening inside your mind, where, in order for growth and exploration and creativity to happen, you need to put your mind into a state where it knows it doesn't have to pay attention to threats.
I think you're talking about set and setting.
There's something to that, Chris, but I think there's another side of it too. So Viveki gives the example of someone getting into flow while rock climbing. And obviously rock climbing is a serious threat. Like you could be in danger at any moment, but because it breaks the previous model of what's safe or where you can go, that starts to get someone into flow. They have to solve these very intense problems. And
but that's different, because when you're rock climbing, the threats are all known. The threat is you could fall. And so you take, whatever precautions you can, you wear a helmet, you wear a harness, and you tie a rope to the harness, you harness yourself to the rock, and it would be really impossible. I've seen beginning rock climbers have a struggle to learn how to rock climb because they don't feel safe. You actually have to fall a few times on the rope to realize that you're safe. And then once you do that, then you're free to flow.
I don't know. I'm not sure that's what the difference is. I think Katie might have been right. Like it might be set and setting, because I don't think it's about being in an environment that's completely safe so much as not caring about the threats, like being able to transcend them and get into a flow state where, like with improv, like in that book Impro, where he talks about like to be good at improv, you have to not care what people think, and you have to really risk looking like a fool, which is a threat, which is something that activates the fear centers as much as anything else, but you have to transcend it.
But I think the deeper idea is that you think those things are threats and they're actually not. And it takes experiencing them and realizing them that they're actually not that bad for you to become comfortable enough to start flowing.
You can be in a flow state in a situation that really is threatening. Like you can rock climb up the side of a mountain face, which, or you could be downhill skiing off of a giant hill. Like you can really risk death and still enter into a flow state.
Sure. And if you actually die, then of course that's the end of you. And if you actually get seriously injured, then you might rethink, doing that again. But again,
it's not the point.
Are flow states the same as these ecstatic experiences? I tend to group them as the same, but I don't know if, like, flow states are generally when you're at the very peak of your ability. So when you're talking about somebody at sports, they are like on the edge of very real risk. A rock climber is going to get into a flow state when they're on the very edge of difficulty where they could fall. A skier where they could fall. But I don't know if that's the state where someone's going to be consciously reprogramming their mind-body connection. Do you think it's the same?
I think it's a subset. Like, I think flow states, especially in like high stakes environments, that's typically like a setting where people report peak experiences a lot. Like a world-class skier going down a hill, like they'll often say that was one of my moments when I was going down the hill and it just became me in the hill and there was nothing else. But I think there is a difference. I don't think all flow states fall into that category. It's a small subset, I'd say.
I would say that when you're in flow, even though there is danger, you're not feeling fear. You're feeling some form of ecstasy.
You feel in control. That's the important thing. The important thing is you know what the threats are and you know how to mitigate them. So if you don't have experience, if you're not, you can't flow in something that you're not experienced in what the threats are. You can't flow on something that you're not experienced doing because you don't know what the threats are. But then once you do the thing, that activity a few times, and you have some kind of a little bit negative experiences, like again, I got much better at rock climbing after I fell a few times and I realized that it wasn't that bad. And I realized, okay, well, this is the worst thing that can happen. And so I don't actually have to worry about that. I can actually focus on the activity of climbing.
I would take issue with that a little bit. I wouldn't say that you feel in control when you're in a flow state. I'd say you feel on the edge of control. You're in a place where you've practiced, and you've practiced and practiced most likely, but you're attempting something where your skill level is just on that edge where if you try to consciously control it and do it, you're not going to be able to do it. You have to let go and lose control a little bit to be able to access the flow of the subconscious, which is always a little bit better at doing things than you consciously are.
Right. You have to take calculated risks. Yeah. But again, you know what the risks are. Right? That's why you can get into a flow state.
I don't know. Like Vervaeke makes a distinction between fear, which is being afraid of something specific, and anxiety, which is being afraid of something diffuse, like just being afraid in general and not being quite sure what you're afraid of. But it seems to me like there's a difference between being anxious and between there being the reality of unknown diffuse threats. And it does seem to me you can be in an environment where there exist unknown diffuse threats and you're able to transcend the anxiety.
Often when people describe being attacked and having to fight for their lives or something like that, for example, they don't exactly know what's going on. But at that point, at least from what I've heard from some people anecdotally, fear shuts down and you just they'll say something takes over and you just fight back or escape or do the best you can. You're just 100% focused. You're just in flow, because maybe at a certain point, fear isn't even useful to you if you need to be that on point.
Right. As Ariel said, fear is a reaction to a known threat, and anxiety is a reaction to unknown threats. And so anxiety tends to make you freeze, whereas fear tends to just make you pay attention a lot. And then a lot of times it takes over and you either fight or you run away.
Well, I would say fear is a feeling, and you're not necessarily feeling fear when you're in flow, even if the flow is a reaction to a very scary thing.
You don't necessarily feel fear or anxiety when you're being threatened.
Right. The scariest moments of the because it's not useful. The most frightening moments of my life, I've had a moment of fright and then I enter like Zen. No more fear. I'm just working at it.
Right, because as you become more comfortable with the situation and you realize that it's not useful to fear.
No, it's not about becoming comfortable with the situation.
So it's a kind of becoming comfortable, isn't it? Like it's kind of acceptance. Like when you were talking about that experience where you nearly drowned, it was like you had this sense of calm because you were like, okay, I get. And I've had the same experience with the bus accident.
Right. Yeah. You're sorry.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Kurt, with the bus?
Yeah, when I was in the bus accident, and I thought, okay, well, I'm bleeding a lot. Maybe I'm gonna die. I guess that's what it is.
Right, exactly. You have this moment of like, it is what it is, and then and you know, like, okay, if I worry about this thing that I can't control, then I'm actually gonna hurt my chances of survival. I'm actually gonna hurt my chances of success. And so you tune that out and you focus on just the task at hand, and that's flow.
Maybe on some level, I think it's much less conscious than that.
Sure, yeah. I didn't say it was necessarily conscious.
I think there's different kinds of it too. Like we've talked a lot about this like idea of flow state as being like at the edge of your abilities, or like the sort of practice-based flow state. But I almost do think that like when you're plunged into a situation that's like completely beyond any of your abilities or any previous experience, there's something that can happen there too. That can be like a peak experience or something like this.
Mm-hmm. I would say that if you're plunged into a situation that's totally beyond any of your abilities, you're operating at the edge of your abilities, and maybe you discover that your abilities are much greater than you knew, or maybe you die.
And if you don't die, you've become a lot bigger than you were before.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of becoming bigger than you were before, the collective neurogenetic circuit occurred.
So, circuit 6 is the morphogenetic circuit. So, this is the idea that we can access genetic memory, and this probably ties into the ideas of past lives and reincarnation. Like maybe somehow we can access something from within our genetic code or within our morphogenetic field that lets us know about what our ancestors were doing.
Hang on, doesn't he call it the collective neurogenetic circuit? Where did he call it the morphogenetic circuit?
Oh, okay. I got this one from the Wikipedia article, so it's
okay. Right. Just keep going, Kurt.
Leary calls it the neurogenetic circuit, according to Wikipedia, and Wilson calls it the morphogenetic circuit. But I guess he might use another name in the book. So it's related to Jung's collective unconscious. Like we can tap into these ideas as are related to Jung's archetypes, because it's like we have all this information from our ancestors about things and factors that go on in the world, and they've been generalized into these archetypes. And you can activate it with higher doses of LSD, peyote, psilocybin, yoga, and meditation. So what's our understanding of this circuit?
I think the circuit is where things start to get a little bit controversial and weird. Like, I don't know what exactly this circuit is getting at. There's certain things that I think maybe I understand. I mean, we can talk about things like epigenetics and instincts that are passed down, but I think that Leary and Wilson are talking about something more on the level of a collective consciousness.
Right. So Jung basically, I don't know if he invented this concept, but of the collective unconscious. But basically, I think he's one of the more prominent proponents of this idea that basically he invented it. Okay, cool. So yeah, it's basically, you know, we all have this these archetypes, these psychological archetypes programmed into us from birth or before birth or whatever. And I think the Leary Wilson model of collective neurogenetic circuit kind of implies that it's stored in your DNA somewhere, and it's accessible in your subjective experience by, I don't know, meditating on archetypes. But yeah, we basically, and it's called a collective circuit because all human beings appear to share these archetypes. So things like the Great Mother and the Pan-like God, just kind of images and things from mythology.
One way to understand the collective unconscious is through analogy with universal grammar. So like Noam Chomsky came up with the concept of universal grammar, which is the idea that even though different languages are different, they all share a same basic structure. So there's like the VSO structure, like the verb, subject, object structure. And it's like they might have a different order. Like I believe in German, the verb comes at the end, whereas in English, the verb goes in the middle. But the basic structure exists across all languages. And there's like a lot of structures like that. They're identified in universal grammar. There's one language that doesn't conform to universal grammar, but every single other language that has ever been discovered does. And so the idea is there's a good amount of evidence that universal grammar is programmed into us genetically. Like there's even situations where like children who are in the olden days when children were deaf, they would kind of just give up on them ever being able to learn language, and they would end up like feral children. And the deaf children that were raised alone without other deaf children would kind of grow up that way. But the ones that were raised with other deaf children would develop a kind of ad hoc sign language. And the sign languages they developed did conform to universal grammar as well. So that's one of the strong pieces of evidence that universal grammar is genetically pre-programmed into us. So the specific language we learn depends on our culture, but the universal grammar is universal. And so you can apply that to archetypes as basically saying there's a universal grammar for culture.
Yeah, I would say that Helen Keller is another example of somebody who was deaf, dumb, and blind and miraculously learned language.
She was taught, though. She was taught by Annie
She was
Sullivan.
taught, but she clearly had an innate ability to learn language, and maybe this collective universal grammar explains that in some way.
Well,
Yeah, definitely.
as do all humans, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like none of us would be able to speak if we didn't have universal grammar. Like, no matter how well you try to teach the dog, it's not going to learn language.
So which language is it that doesn't comply with universal grammar? Do you know, Ariel?
It's Paraha in the Amazon. It's controversial. Like there's been some ethnologists or linguists that have gone down there and have said it does conform to universal grammar. But the guy who spent the most time there and like kind of lived with them for like the guy who spent the most time there compiled a lot of evidence that it does not conform to universal grammar. And it's like a lot simpler than other language. Like I shouldn't say simpler, but it's like they have they have the simplest familial vocabulary and familial system of any known culture. Like I think they only identify 2 kinds of relatives, or maybe 3, I don't remember. And they don't have counting. They have like something like one, some, or many, but they don't actually have counting. And they have, I forget if I don't think they have a past tense either. I'm a little bit like, I'll link it in the description, but I'm a little bit shaky on the details. But it's the one researcher claimed it doesn't conform. Go ahead, Katie.
I was going to say specifically one thing that I know he claimed didn't conform to universal grammar that was kind of controversial is he said that their language doesn't have recursion. Like basically in every other language, you could construct a grammatically correct, infinitely long sentence. One way to do this would be like with possession, like my friends, sisters, mothers, brothers, dogs, buddies, like you could go on and on and on and on, but in their language they don't have that, or at least the researcher who lived with them, or I think it might have actually been a missionary who lived with them and learned the language, claimed that their language did not have recursion. They would just say something like, my friend has dog has parent, in separate sentences, and that there wasn't really a way to.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah. I think that's connected to them not having numbers, because you need recursion for numbers beyond like a very small number of them.
Yeah.
Really
I think it was 1, 2, 3, and many, something like that. And it was interesting too, because they talk about trying to teach adults English or other languages who are coming from the Paraha, and apparently adults really struggled to learn how to count in other languages. Once they got to where their limit was, it was just like the concept was extremely challenging, or they couldn't do it, but the kids had no problem.
And it's interesting because you find something, I mean, more severe, but analogous probably, like with feral children. Like if someone doesn't learn language within a certain period of time as a child, and it may vary from person to person, but then they can never fully learn a language. Like they can sort of learn a few words and like they can make sentences, but the sentences are, they can't really make sentences that lack ambiguity when being communicated to another person. And people in Paraha definitely can. Like they definitely do have far more capabilities than that. But there's a certain, like, if you don't learn certain constructs, it's like imprinting again. It's because there's this universal grammar that we're all primed for, but if you don't actually use it within a certain window, then it's gone.
Right. Chomsky's idea of the critical, what was it? Critical age or critical point? I forget the name of the concept, but it's like if you don't learn language by age 12, maybe you'll never really get it. And there's an example of a child who was kept in captivity, kind of locked in a room, and they called her Jeannie. It's not her real name. And she only knew 2 words, which were like "shut up" and "stop it," which are not they're not exactly words. And then when she finally got out and was released and started to learn language, she could eventually speak English, but it was like a pigeon. So she would speak maybe 2 or 3 words in a sentence, like "get book" or something like that, and never be able to completely understand or master English.
Yeah, this idea of recursion being missing is interesting, because it seems to me that the idea of archetypes is that your brain, and Wilson says specifically the right side of your brain, is using these images as a kind of an isomorphism or an analogy of concepts that are repeated throughout our experience. And our brains are saying, here's a bunch of instances of a thing, and here's a way that they all connect, right? It's this kind of abstracted version of all of these concrete instances of things. And so, yeah, they talk about how UFO contact stories probably fit into this sixth circuit. The right side of your brain is just giving you this flash of meaning that comes, all at once, where, yeah, basically the UFO might not actually be aliens or something like that, but it's just this vision. Dreams could also be seen as something in the same category, where the right side of your brain is just interpreting something for you, or it's giving you an abstract version of something that you need to understand, and then you can go and try to interpret it using, I don't know, your third rational circuit.
So let me try to clarify that. Are you saying that, like, say something like a UFO experience, it could be a sort of archetypal experience that exists within us, and sometimes it spontaneously comes out, and we're like, what was that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, okay. I mean, I think you hear stories all the time, and this is what Wilson says. I mean, basically, we hear these stories again and again of people having visitations from supernatural beings or alien beings or something like that, and something in the imagery is our right brain trying to convey to our left brain some important idea.
And another example of this is like in the Cosmic Trigger, Robert Anton Wilson talks about like Mescalito, which is like this little being that people often encounter on mescaline. And supposedly people encounter the same being and have a similar subjective experience cross-culturally. And so if you like accept that like datum, there's a few different ways to interpret it, right? Like you can interpret it like it's all suggestibility, like that suggests like that story traveled with the mescaline and people are just suggestible. That's one way of interpreting it. Another way of interpreting it is there is actually a little being. There's actually a little green man called Mescalito who appears to people with mescaline as an external reality. That's another way of interpreting it. Or you can interpret it in this like Jungian archetype way. Like it says somehow, and it's basically saying that there's something in the human brain that when you turn a key in a particular lock, people see Mescalito. And then it's up to, and the next step is to interpret what that means or why that is.
Do you believe in Mescalito? Do you accept that datum?
I haven't experienced Mescalito. I think I would have to do more research.
First-hand research, if you know what I'm saying.
I don't know.
Participatory knowing.
I think there are these images though that people experience cross-culturally.
Yeah.
And I would be somewhat skeptical of the first option of saying it's just suggestibility. It seems to me there's something more to it than that. And the Jungian collective unconscious interpretation seems like a really strong argument to me.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what can explain these phenomena is your subjective experience is a model of the universe, right? Or somewhere in your brain, you're holding this abstraction of the universe. And the abstraction tells you how to interpret things and it tells you how to behave. And I was reading an article somewhere that talked about, we didn't evolve to see the universe as it is. We evolved to see the universe as it would most be useful to us to see. So, we didn't evolve to be able to see radio waves, for instance, because radio waves don't really affect us, much, at least as much as visible light does. And so, we see this very, very filtered version of reality, which tells us how to behave and helps us to survive. And so I think these archetypal images can be seen as, something which informs our behavior about common human experiences that have been experienced by all humans since time immemorial. And these images that we have don't necessarily tell us something about what's there. Maybe they do, but more likely what they do is they tell us how to interact with certain phenomena that we encounter.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's uncontroversial that there's some things that we're pre-programmed for. Like the language example is pretty uncontroversial, or like it's pretty uncontroversial that we're all pre-programmed to see a certain wavelength of light. But then the question is, where does it end? Like, are we pre-programmed to come into this world and to expect a mother and to expect a father? Are we pre-programmed to is there a hole that God is supposed to fill, or that some kind of higher principle is supposed to fill? Are gods parasitic on the mother and father archetype? Like that's where you get into like, is there a trickster? Is there like a trickster image that we kind of on some level come into the world like expecting to find? Like, our concepts like justice and freedom archetypal or pre-programmed? Like that's where it gets really confusing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think my understanding is that basically there are different layers of hardware and software, as it were. And the software, if you want to look at the brain as a computer, or at the human being as a kind of like cyborg or something like that, you've got these software layers which can easily be updated over time as reality evolves. So this would be things like things that you learned over the course of your life would be the very most shallow level of programming, and then there would be the cultural software, which is just stuff that that you learned from your society as a kid, and then there are things that are clearly like other layers that are deeper and deeper, and these correspond to human experiences that are more universal and more eternal. And so the longer something lasts, and the more people experience it, the sort of deeper level in your programming it will go. So of course the DNA is like the ultimate hardware, but I think there's sort of intermediate levels of firmware, if you will, like epigenetics and things like mitochondrial DNA and stuff like that.
Right. So I did a little research on that and trying to find out what's the hard science in terms of what can be passed on to generations. And they've done a lot of research with mice, and especially with the types of RNA. And they say when a mouse encounters trauma, it's likely to be passed down for, I think, at least one generation through the RNA. Maybe it's a couple of generations. And I have heard that said about humans too. Like if somebody has PTSD, it can last with them for 2 generations. But I don't know how solid that is scientifically.
It is solid. The mechanism is through DNA methylation. So it's like this way the DNA is packaged in your chromosomes and not the code itself.
Okay, thanks.
Right. And so I think what's happening is there's these kind of universal archetypes that are present in all humans. And I think the reason why you see that is because it's present in all human DNA. But then there's kind of less universal archetypes, sort of cultural archetypes, that are kind of more ephemeral.
I have a question. If we were to accept this universal archetype framework, and kind of to make an analogy to the universal language framework like we talked about earlier, do we think that there are certain critical points where if you don't understand these archetypes at some point during your childhood, that you might never be able to access them or access them fully?
I would say no, because it's in your DNA. It's already there. So
Yeah, but so is the language things,
is
and that's
language.
the analogy you're drawing, right? Like,
Mhm.
yeah.
I mean, I think maybe I'm just guessing here, but I'm guessing maybe the archetypes are there even for feral children. It's just there's no way to express them because language is not at the same level as some of these archetypes.
Yeah, like it seems like with feral children, they're still able to learn language far beyond what any animal would learn, but they don't actually, they're not like their language, like their ability to access universal grammar is irrevocably damaged. I think probably if the archetypes aren't fully activated in childhood, something is shifted.
Take, for example, like the mother archetype, even if it's not with the mother, if someone doesn't have a nurturing presence early on, something is shifted.
Yeah, that's like the Harlow monkeys. Like when they did those studies with you guys have probably heard of it, but they put monkeys in cages where they didn't have any mother, but they had these like dolls, and one doll was made completely of wire, and one doll was made was like plush, and the monkeys that had the plush doll were kind of okay, and like they were more emotionally healthy, and the ones that only had the wire doll grew up to be very screwed up and were very depressed monkeys and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that goes all the way back to the circuit 1, the biosurvival imprint, which is behavior that we can see in well, any form of life that has a mother probably has mothering and imprinting a mother figure somewhere in their DNA, I would guess.
And it's a mammalian thing. Like reptiles don't care about their mothers or their children. But I mean, I think that where it gets back to circuit 6 is because the two archetypes that are most likely, like if these are like if mother and father, if these archetypes don't exist, then the theory is doesn't have much left to stand on. And like if you read like Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning, he makes a pretty grand argument that through the archetype of the mother and the father, we basically construct human history, and we can like, as so much of human culture is built on top of that archetype, like the archetypes that we come into the world seeking.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's important to draw a distinction between like, you know, we have like there are these very ancient forms of life that have a sense of a mother and father somewhere in their DNA. And then circuit 6, which is kind of like we have that in our DNA, and we can also access it through higher states of consciousness.
And maybe, I guess sex is more ancient than mother and father because sexual reproduction is older than.
Right, exactly. Like the
Parental.
male, masculine and feminine archetypes, things like that.
I don't know, because I mean, masculine and feminine doesn't mean the same thing for other animals.
Sexual dimorphism isn't a universal.
No, but it's more ancient than like mothering.
Right.
True. I would say that the divine feminine and the divine masculine are not necessarily the same thing as the mother and the father archetypes. They're certainly like analogous in certain ways, but not exactly equivalent.
We're talking about accessing these archetypes through our higher states of consciousness, not just are they or are they not in our DNA. What do you guys think it looks like to access these archetypes through higher states of consciousness? Does anybody have experience with that?
Well, I think we could say like taking ayahuasca and experiencing grandma helping us out or giving us a big warm hug. I guess I would never want to reduce that and say, well, that's just something within my DNA. But that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, I think there's this idea like it's weird, right? Because like people like smoke DMT and they'll see a whole bunch of stuff. Like they'll see characteristic, like they'll see characteristic patterns. And even that, like, why do people see the same patterns on DMT? Like, why do people smoke DMT and they see certain patterns, then they Google DMT art and they see the exact same patterns that some other person has seen on the same substance? Like, is it just suggestibility? Like, have they just seen it before? And it's possible, but it does. And then there's like certain kinds of beings that they'll see. There's like the machine elves, and like people keep seeing the machine elves and they keep seeing like certain kinds of beings. And it's like, what does it mean? Like, is it just, it must seem like at the very least, there must be, at the very least, it seems to me that there's got to be some kind of characteristic style of hallucination that happens on different kinds of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Is like the most materialist possible explanation. And then it's like, is that just random? Like, is it just like a random fluke that like when you take a drug, it turns a key and you see the machine elf? Or is it like, is the machine elf symbolic of something in our psyche? I think that's the question.
Is the machine elf symbolic of something in our psyche? Are these fractal, geometric, kaleidoscopic patterns symbolic of something in our psyche? I know, at least for me, when I experienced it, it felt very personal, and it felt very much like it was part of my psyche, but that's not any evidence.
And that's the thing. If you take that step and you say it is symbolic of something, it is part of my psyche, and then you're like, okay, 10 million other people have a similar experience, then you start to ask the question, is it symbolic of something in our collective psyche? Is it symbolic in something of our culture?
Well, and I think that it's symbolic of something in reality. I think that's why it's there. I mean, I think if you study nature, I think there's fractals everywhere. I think our brains have evolved to detect those patterns.
And that's the question that really gets to the root of it, right? With this circuit 6 is like, is it reality? Like, is it something that's actually there, or are our brains just making patterns of the chaos?
Great question.
Great question. Speaking of making patterns.
Yeah. Synchronicity. That's what you're getting at, right? So
Yeah. Is synchronicity a circuit 6 thing?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, then we should go there. I was going to say.
All right.
You're finishing each other's synchronicities.
Yeah.
So one of the experiments or exercises that it has in Prometheus Rising, one of the early chapters, is say you start visualizing a quarter on the side of the footpath or whatever, and see how long it takes for you to find it. And then you can start switching between two hypotheses. One is that you don't have that you're actually manifesting this quarter, so you're somehow bringing it into being by visualizing it. And then the other hypothesis is that you're just looking for it, and so naturally, sooner or later, you find one. And so every time you find one, you switch between these two hypotheses. So I didn't do the experiment with the quarter or with a 10 peso note or something, but there was this post on Reddit talking about owls. And in this post, talking about visualizing an owl around the same time we were reading this book. And so I started visualizing an owl, and a lot of owls popped up. So the next day I was sitting in a cafe, and a guy came up to me and he was selling these wood prints. And I said, well, I'll have a look. And the second one was, I don't know if I have it here, but the second one was a picture of an owl. Then the next day I saw on Instagram, there was this graffiti in Mexico City in Iztapalapa of the spirit guide, or the connection between the living and the dead, the Golotl. And that's an owl again, and painted in these very amazing, colorful figures. And then I saw some others. Some came up on my Facebook feed when I was looking back through it from 3 weeks ago that I hadn't really noticed before. I was also looking up improv games on YouTube, and there was this episode of Drew Carey's Improvaganza with Colin Mockery, and I hadn't seen the picture of Colin Mockery recently, but he has like this white flowing hair off the side of his head and he's bald, and the director started saying, okay, so Colin is going to act out this scene where the white-crested owl does its mating dance, and Colin started doing this. And then there was another three or so instances. So every time I switch between the hypothesis, or nearly every time, trying to think of it in each way. And I don't really know which is the correct hypothesis. It does seem weird that I would see so many owls all over the place. And actually the hypothesis which intuitively feels more true is the manifestation one.
Right. So like the two ways to look at it are basically like confirmation bias, like, or no, what's the word? Attentional priming. Because you're looking for owls, you're finding
activating system.
Right. And the other one is that you're manifesting owls on some spiritual level by setting the intention of seeking them.
Yeah. So maybe I can just read this. In one of the exercises in Prometheus Rising says, psychologist Barbara Honegger explains synchronicities by saying that the right brain hemisphere, where this circuit is located, moves you in space-time to the place where the synchronicity will occur, while the rationalist left brain invents rationalizations to go there. Synchronicities are a language through which this circuit communicates with the left brain in this theory. What messages is your right brain trying to send to your left brain? So using this theory, basically both things are happening. Your right brain is trying to cause the synchronicity to occur. It's trying to go in space and time where the effect will be observed, and then the left brain has to try and invent ways to figure out why this crazy synchronicity is happening.
Interesting. If we were to accept synchronicities, it's true. I think, or the way I would interpret it at least, is that it points to some fundamental patterns and cycles in the universe that we're tuned into, or that our minds are tuned into some kind of recurring pattern. And I was actually struggling to see how those synchronicities and the archetypes linked in the same circuit, but that's helping me put it together.
Yeah, because there's still the two ways of looking at it, right? Like you can still look at it like it's just chaos and random data, but because your mind is the pattern maker, it's finding the patterns that you want to find, basically, or that you tell it you're looking for. So just Kurt would have just ignored the owls and Colin Mockery's ear hair and whatever before, but now because he's looking for owls, he sees them. And the other explanation is, that there is a pattern, and that on some level your mind is finding it. There's still the three explanations, because there's the archetype type of explanations. There is a pattern on some level, your mind is finding it and directing you towards where it is. And the third explanation is that you're like literally altering the world to offer you more owls by setting that intention.
Right.
Who doesn't need more owls in their life?
That's a good question.
Maybe the worms.
Here's another one for the list. I thought about an owl tattoo since I was like 12 years old. Maybe I'll get it now because of this.
All right.
So I think the important thing is that because the archetypes and patterns are supposedly in your DNA, you should be able to recognize patterns that you've never experienced. So something will come across your experience, and then your right brain will go like, "Oh, I recognize that," even though it's something from like 1,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 years ago. It's not something that you've actually experienced. And so I think that's a cool idea, that your brain can like see patterns that it's never actually firsthand experienced. It just has it somewhere embedded in the DNA.
So that's a hypothesis about what deja vu is.
Yeah, and you can still have the multiple explanations, because you could say like deja vu it's just your brain imposing a pattern where none exists, or just creating a pattern between different things where none exists. You could say it's the ancestral memory, or picking up on, I guess you could also say it's picking up on a significant pattern from within your own life that you can't consciously recognize.
Right. And then, there is the theory that we're just creating reality with our consciousness, but that's in a later circuit.
Have any of you had a really weird synchronicity which still stands out?
Actually, there was one when we were reading about synchronicities. There were actually two. I put them in the chat. One sec.
I just had a weird. Did you guys hear that crazy popping noise in the background? I have no idea what that was.
Yeah, I heard a little rumbling.
It was the space-time continuum.
It's God
as
telling
soon
you
as you
not
said,
to ask questions.
well, I don't know. Like I'm skeptical of synchronicities, but I do think that was interesting to point out. As soon as you said, has anybody ever had a weird synchronicity that still stands out? There was just behind my head, and I don't see anything. There was like a loud pop. I have no idea what that was. It felt like it was right here.
Maybe it was your right brain trying to tell your left brain something. So
Wait, did you guys not hear it? Was that in my mind?
No, I heard something. I heard
Okay.
something
you might have been muted, Katie.
Okay.
No.
I don't think I was.
So I had a couple of synchronicities earlier while we were reading about synchronicities. And he does say in one of the exercises that thinking about synchronicities will make you experience them more, which is so meta. But so the first one was, I was reading an article about Ram Dass, also known as Richard Alpert, who was an associate of Timothy Leary's. It says he was an American spiritual teacher, former academic and clinical psychologist, author of many books, including Be Here Now. He is known for his personal and professional associations with Timothy Leary at Harvard. And then it says he's still, he's also known for founding the charitable organizations Seva Foundation and Hanuman Foundation, and continues to teach via his website, produces a podcast with the support from 1440 Multiversity. And I was like, whoa, Multiversity, that's the name of our podcast. And then nobody said anything about this in the chat, so I was kind of disappointed about that. And then I saw another one like right away where Neil Strauss, who was the guy who wrote the game, and we did an episode about the game and Pick Up Artistry a few episodes ago, apparently interviewed Timothy Leary in 1988, and they talked about turn on, tune in, drop out. So apparently Timothy Leary is actually was the focal point of both of these synchronicities. So is it a coincidence that the high priest of LSD is connected with these synchronicities? I think not.
Timothy Leary may just be the focal point of all synchronicities.
Maybe he invented synchronicities and they never happened before he came along.
We just live in a Timothy Leary centric universe.
Very possible.
I like it. I can't point to any specific synchronicities, although I have had increasing deja vu, and I feel like my deja vu tends to come in moments that are kind of meaningful. Well, my feelings of deja vu only tend to come along in like deep philosophical conversations, or if I'm working on something that feels important. So maybe it's just that frame of mind where I'm in something philosophical, like primes my mind to experience this sensation of deja vu, and it's just like a neurological thing. Or maybe there's some kind of a pattern to the deja vus.
Yeah, again, I think it's your right brain probably detecting some pattern with what's happening currently and what's happened before. Your brain is going, this has happened before, and it will happen again.
It's a question. Did it actually happen before? Or is it just that if I'm in this flow state or in kind of a mind expanding state that I feel the sensation of deja vu?
A lot of people claim that deja vu is when they're actually experiencing something which they've already seen in a dream. So
Yeah.
I might, in that situation, I might start a dream log, which is an interesting thing to do for anybody.
Right. I think whenever you have these kind of meaningful experiences, that's the feeling of your brain connecting what's happening now to something else. There's two things being connected that weren't previously connected. And so whether that's something that you previously experienced or whether it's something that some human in the distant past experienced and somehow it's in your DNA now, we don't know. But I would say definitely your brain is making some kind of connection. It could be a spurious connection that, doesn't have any bearing on reality. But whenever you have that, as Reiki talks about, that feeling of like plausibility and like meaning, like just like kind of a like intuitive sense, like, oh, this is meaningful, then I would say there's something significant about that, like something objectively significant.
I wouldn't say whenever. I wouldn't say whenever it happens is significant. Like, I think at the very least, even if some of them are significant, or even if some of them are cosmically significant or ancestrally significant, I think we have to be able to say there are definitely situations where, or there are almost certainly situations where people see patterns that don't exist or overfit to the data, or see patterns where see patterns or nothing exists. Like that's kind of part of what psychosis is, right? Like when you get an idea where it's like everyone is spying on me and they're not really, and then you start to see evidence all over the place that the spying is happening.
Yeah, it's a lot of what psychosis is overactive pattern recognition. It's also a lot of what happens when you're on psychedelic is you'll have overactive pattern recognition. Like if you're looking at trees, you'll be more likely to see faces jump out at you and things like that. It's not just psychosis or on drugs though. It's also really common. Like that's what a superstition is.
Yeah, and I think when you're on psychedelics and you see patterns everywhere, you can easily rationalize that experience because you're on drugs. You can just say, well, this is probably not some deep, significant connection that my brain is making. It's probably just some drug influenced spurious connection.
I mean, if we believe that there are real patterns out there that we are actually finding, and that our brain is just like an imperfect, like as a pattern finder that sometimes works well and sometimes doesn't work well, and ways it cannot work well are either by false negatives, by like missing a pattern that exists, or false positives by overfitting to a pattern that doesn't actually exist. And if psychedelics turn up our pattern finding ability, then it'll reduce false negatives and increase false positives, but it could also increase true positives.
Well, and I think, you know, when your brain does that, you know, when it makes a connection between things, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a false positive. It just means like, okay, my brain made a connection. Now I have a jumping off point for further study so that I can, you know, do some experiments, you know, and figure out if this connection actually exists or if it's just sort of a correlation instead of a causation.
Oh, there's one thing I want to mention about this idea of autistic savants. So whether some spontaneous abilities can come out of somebody's genes. So I mentioned that thing about the mice and the trauma and PTSD, but then this other area which is still, it's up in the air, or it's controversial, or maybe it's completely wacko. I'm not sure, but this fellow, his name is Dr. Daryl Treffitt. He's done a lot of research in this area. He's been meeting savants for more than 50 years, and he claims that in some cases people have abilities which they shouldn't have. They're too young to have been exposed so much to music or this kind of thing, but they can play music and they can sculpt and these other things. So what do we think about that?
It's a rabbit hole.
I was going to say it's hard to say. I tend to lean skeptic on everything, but especially with that, I would wonder, like, if we're talking about things like painting, music, sculpting, these are skills. So I wonder if, I mean, they could be a result of just an extraordinary amount of practice or an extraordinary amount of talent. I don't think it necessarily, well, I guess an extraordinary amount of talent in something does imply that there's some innate ability that humans possess for these things. And I do think that humans have a music archetype or some music archetypes. We seem to cross-culturally react to certain sounds as being happy and certain sounds as being sad. And perhaps there are some kids that can tap into that without so much training.
Yeah, I have heard that's actually more cultural than we might think. But another related point is supposedly about 30,000 years ago, that's when arithmetic started to enter into the human experience. And so perhaps that has some kind of genetic basis. Before that, humans really couldn't do much maths at all.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like this gets into the big question of like nature versus nurture, and it's really hard to know where to draw the line. Like it seems almost certain that there's something like hand-eye coordination has a genetic element to it. It seems almost certain there's something like the ability to rapidly abstract, which has to do with math ability. There may be is there something like a sense of harmony that allows you to create more beautiful, more aesthetically beautiful creations? Is there something like an innate sense of music? Is there something like an innate sense of, painting is one of the oldest technologies. Like it doesn't seem crazy to me that there would be somehow something in our DNA. Like, I mean, some kids, you can even see them like with their food when they're little babies, they start smearing it around. Like it almost seems like proto. And then you get into epigenetics and like to what extent are like natural talents wrapping around the things in the child's environment, and to what extent are they like instinctively responding to the things in their environment as what they are with some kind of genetic impulse. I think it gets complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think the crux of the issue is that nature versus nurture is not a black and white issue. There's a spectrum of nature versus nurture. Some things are very, very nurture, and some things are very, very nature, and some things are somewhere in the middle.
Like, I mean, I'm sure that for with painting ability, there's a large element of genetics, but the question is, are there kids that are able to just pick up the brush and start painting without ever being taught it? I think that's where it gets tricky.
It does get tricky there. This is just speculation and suspicion based on personal experience. But to me, when you talked about that sense of beauty or that sense of aesthetic, it does feel like there is something innate, or at least something very, very early about it. I'm not sure. Or maybe there's multiple, probably more likely there's multiple senses of aesthetic, because I can think back to even when I was a small child, and I went to school with a lot of the same kids growing up all the way from age 5 through 18, and a few of them I've kept in touch with. And the kids who were somewhat artistic when they were very, very young, or even if they weren't producing art and everybody's drawings kind of looked the same, but just kids who had taste in music beyond Britney Spears or whatever was popular when we were 5 tended to become more artistic later on. It seems like it's very earlier. There's certain aesthetic buckets that different people fall into and tend to go down throughout their lives. Does anybody else feel that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's certain abilities that are more innate, and people tend to pursue activities that they have innate ability in, because of flow, I would guess, because it's easier to get into flow in an activity where you already have some kind of understanding of what's going on. So, I mean, another thing is I know I do this. I don't paint. I don't draw very well. One of the reasons is because I see that I'm much better at music in terms of the average, and I'm much worse at painting and drawing in terms of the average. So there is that sort of, you're comparing yourself to other people, and you can tell when you're not very good at something, or you can tell when you are good at something.
I'm not so much talking about technical skill, though, in terms of what I was trying to get at with the music and the drawing. Like, maybe there is some innate technical skill with visual arts or music, but I think a lot of that comes down to practice. But I'm talking about more, it seems like there's some kind of innate ability for certain people to be able to tune into particular aesthetics and really get them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely had innate music ability compared to the average person.
It seems like it's a form of either pattern making or pattern finding. You're able to one way of looking at it is if you're able to tune into the patterns of the universe, then you're able to tune into the patterns of what makes things beautiful, and you're able to tune into the patterns of what makes things what they truly are. And so it doesn't really matter if it's music or art. Like with its art, visual art, you look at something and you're able to see how it fits together, and then you're able to replicate it in a way that both tunes into the pattern of what it is and tunes into the pattern of what makes things beautiful. I think with music, it's similar. It's about harmonizing with the universe on some level.
There's also a component of you have to think it's beautiful. Like, I think one of the things that keeps you in flow is you feel like you're producing something cool, or you may not care what other people think about what you're doing, but you like it. So it's jiving with your particular sense of beauty.
I think those things converge. Like, I think when you're a little kid and you're creating art, you're and you have some kind of talent, like you're creating it in a way that you find beautiful. Like, you're not really thinking about other people. You're just creating something that you like. You're not consciously thinking like, I'm harmonizing with the patterns, but in the process of creating something you like, if the kid just is in touch with the patterns, they are creating something that's both beautiful and truthful in some way. And then as you grow up and you become an adult, it's almost like it's a process of enculturation that takes place in many domains. Like you develop like a theory of mind, and you start to see things from other people's perspectives, and you become in tune with what the harmony of the culture is. Like you become more in tune with other people, and then you're still kind of creating for yourself, but you're also creating in a conversation with everybody else.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at somebody else's art, a lot of what makes you think, oh, that's beautiful, a lot of times it's just that it was an authentic expression of that person. And maybe you feel like you share something in common with that person. And so that art that they produce looks beautiful to you or sounds beautiful to you. That authenticity comes through. But I think if you're creating your own art and you're considering what you've created, I think it's a lot more that you're just creating something that you think is cool. Yeah, maybe authenticity comes into that as well.
I think it's authentic, nuanced, like subtle and beautiful. Because it's like I can just like have like just an expression of unprocessed rage, and that can be authentic. But if I try to like, if I'm like, I am so angry at the world, why is the world so mean to me? Like that can be very authentic, but it
won't resonate with many.
Well, but it could. Like people might really, really resonate with that. And that's what you see with these, outrage memes,
But it's still clever. It's still making an observation that's beyond the threshold of what seems obvious to people.
It's interesting to me. I don't have much to say about it, but I'm pondering a lot on what it is that makes certain people gravitate towards certain aesthetics of art and music. Because I know you're saying it is cultural, and I think it is to an extent, but I don't know. It does also feel like you can, to some extent, tell a lot about a person's personality, no matter what culture they're from, by the types of sounds that they resonate with and the types of imagery that they resonate with.
I mean, I'm saying there's a level on which it's universal, there's a level on which it's cultural, and there's a level on which it's individual.
Mm-hmm. I guess especially in this day and age, there really aren't many cultures that are untouched by each other.
I mean, it's a strange age also because there's all this cultural diffusion happening. So it's all these rich combinations are happening. And at the same time, it's like things are getting remixed in all these different ways. And even in music, like there's just like there's so much exposure to music because we have the internet. Like even in our parents' generation, like if they want to listen to a song, they have to go to the record store and like listen to it's a big, like we can listen to all kinds of music. And so even like genres of music are now like, you can never hear a song anymore that's just one genre.
Yeah. And songs and music also had to pass kind of through word of mouth recommendation or through things like magazines, whereas now we have AI that predict based on this song, you might like this song because people who like this song tend to keep playing this song for more than 10 seconds when it comes up next, It can just proliferate much more rapidly and into much more specific and like down into much deeper spirals than it ever could.
This might be a good segue to Circuit 7. Are you guys feeling?
Yes.
Like moving on? Okay. Okay. We took a little break, but we're back and we're going to talk about Circuit 7 and 8. So Circuit 7 is the metaprogramming circuit. It's a really special circuit. It's one of my favorite circuits. It's the basic idea in Circuit 7 is you go back and you can alter previous circuits. It's the circuit that allows you to reprogram the circuits that come before. And it operates through the vessel of rationality, much like Circuit 3, but there's some important differences between the two, which we're going to get into. So how did you guys understand Circuit 7?
Circuit 7 is my favorite circuit. To me, Circuit 7 is about being able to get to know yourself and observe your mental processes and your emotional processes and your physical processes so that you can consciously go in and change them. it's about taking all those unconscious processes, like how do we form beliefs, and why do I emotionally react to certain things in certain ways, and learning how to work with yourself so that you can become more of who you want to be or try out different mindsets.
Okay, so Wilson calls it the metaprogramming circuit, as you said. He compares it to what Douglas Hofstadter writes about consciousness in his book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, which is basically, that consciousness is this process of reflecting on yourself. So, before you reflect, you're kind of in your experience, and then you reflect, and then your experience becomes the object, and you're the subject. And actually, the process of reflection is almost like a process of separation of the subject from the object. So you're taking yourself out of the equation by figuring out which things belong to you and which things belong to basically which features are internal and which features are external. So basically, like if you're looking at your biases, this would be one way of taking yourself out of the equation and just stepping back in order to understand reality better and understanding yourself better as well.
Chris, I'm wondering if you could walk us through an example in a little more detail. Like, I really like how you described it before as like a recursive thing.
Yeah. So, the way I see this circuit is kind of like, you have
the subject and object. So.
Yeah. So when you first make the subject-object separation, what you're doing is you're taking yourself out of what, you're taking the subject out of the equation. And then what you realize as soon as you've done that is that isn't the whole picture, because there's still a subject doing that. And so you have to take yourself out of the equation again. And you can do this infinitely many times. A way that Wilson talks about it is he talks about that there was a guy painting a vista or something like that, and he realized, oh no, this picture isn't complete because I, the painter, am not in the painting, and so I have to redo the painting over again and put the painter into the painting. And then, of course, immediately upon doing this, he realizes, oh no, this isn't complete, because what I need is the painting, the painter with the easel and the vista. But of course, what's missing is that I need to have, myself on the painting in the painting. And so you have this painting within a painting within a painting within a painting infinitely. So the seventh circuit is kind of the circuit that enables you to constantly realize that constantly bring yourself one step higher than before, basically. Abstract everything that you know out into and pull yourself out to a higher level of understanding.
Cool. So it makes me think of Tony Robbins in Awaken the Giant Within, where he talks about people's rules for being happy. And so a lot of people have really high standards for what will make them happy. So they have to be fulfilled in their personal life, in their physical fitness, in their diet, and their work life, and everything. And it means that they basically never get to be happy because they've got all these standards and everything has to be in perfect alignment. So what he talks about is you can decide the rules of what's going to make you happy. So maybe you just say, well, I'm out dancing with my friends, or it's a sunny day, or I'm smiling and therefore I'm happy. And that's an example of how you can rewrite your own programming.
Like, this makes me think of like, I'm trying to think back to Vervaeke and like scaling up and scaling down, because he kind of makes this distinction between you can focus your attention both outwards into the world around you, like your awareness, or you can focus your awareness internally. And you can scale your awareness up so that you're focusing on gestalts, like overall, just like as it presents itself to you, or you can scale your awareness into down so that you're focusing more on fine details and distinctions between things. And so I'm wondering, because he talks about there's like two directions that are kind of transcendent, which is when you focus outwards and you scale up, or when you focus inwards and you scale down. It seems like this process of, like Chris was describing and that Kurt kind of gave an example of, it seems like it's kind of a process of focusing inwards and scaling down. Like, what do you guys think?
I see it as a process of focusing inwards and scaling down so that you can then apply and focus something new outwards through yourself.
I think this circuit is maybe what Vervaeke is getting at with the whole sort of mystical experience thing, where I think it can either go down or it can go up. You can either be focusing inward or you can be focusing outward. The way that Vervaeke explains it is, he says, you have a probe, which can be like a pen or something like that, and you have a object, which is like a cup or something like that, and you can tap the cup with the probe, and so the probe is almost like an extension of you, right? So it's like if you put all of your consciousness into the probe, then you are at that level of awareness, but you can go even further into reality, as it were, by going into the object, right? The thing that you're probing, and that can become a part of you. And so, or you can go the other direction and you can think about your hand, which is holding the probe, or you can think about your arm, which is connected to your hand, and you can think about your, on up, I guess in some sense that's inward, because you're going from reality into yourself, and in some sense it's outward because you're increasing the size and scope of your
there's two dimensions. There's two dimensions. There's the Gestalt and what do you call it? Fine grain. There's basically high abstraction, low resolution, high abstraction, and that's one axis, scaling up and scaling down. There's another one that's focusing inwards and focusing outwards.
Yeah, the way that Hofstadter puts it is there's holism and there's reductionism. And holism is, of course, the Gestalt. It's looking at the whole picture. And reductionism is, as Vervaeke would say, the features. You've broken the Gestalt down into its components, and you're looking at each one individually.
Yeah, that's one axis, and there's this other one. Because what about this? Like, what about focusing inwards on the Gestalt is circuit 5, focusing outwards on the features is circuit 6, focusing inwards on the features is circuit 7, focusing outwards on the Gestalt is circuit 8.
Maybe it's a bit hard for me to follow. So what was it again?
Yeah, what's the inwards and outwards? Yeah, is that what I was mentioning?
There's two axes.
It's a different axis. Yeah.
So you were talking about holism versus reductionism, and that's one of the axes. That's the features versus Gestalt.
Right.
And then the other axis is outwards or inwards, and that's referring towards into yourself or out into the world, as I understand.
Yeah, Vervaeke calls it meditation when it's inwards and contemplation when it's outwards.
Okay, so meditation would be like you're going further and further into abstraction, right? And outwards would be you're going outward into concreteness.
No, not necessarily, because there are two axes. So you could focus inwards and focus on something that's very particular. So, for example, focusing on your left big toe, or focus on a particular emotion that's inside of you.
Your breath.
Your breath. Yeah, good example. Yeah. But if you focus inwards on the Gestalt, you could focus inwards and focus on your entire body. So it's two.
I still don't understand I forgot the difference between inwards and outwards. That's all I'm trying to get.
Okay. Well, you could focus outwards. Say you focus on a flame or on a rose or on the sun or on the sounds that are surrounding you in the temple.
Yeah. One of them is you're going more towards into your senses, and the other one is you're going more towards into your cogitation, like your abstraction. One is more concrete and one is more abstract, right?
I wouldn't necessarily make that, because like the modern definition of senses includes senses that are focused on the self, like proprioception and interoception, like being able to feel processes in your own body. The basic distinction is that one is taking place outside the boundaries of your body and one is taking place within the boundaries of your body.
Yeah, I could even say I could be focusing inward on myself, but focusing on my senses. If I was, say, focusing on the experience of vision or the experience of hearing and really trying to understand that, I would say that was me focusing inward as opposed to focusing outward. If I'm focusing inward, I'm trying to learn about myself. If I'm focusing outward, I'm trying to learn about this water bottle or the lamp over there or the tree.
Yeah, or say, so with the probe example, or say you're holding on to a glass of water, you can focus on the glass, or you can focus on the feeling within your fingers, like with the probe and the cup. It's related.
Okay, so, and then Ariel, you were saying that this somehow connects to the circuits 5 through 8.
Yeah, I was trying to connect the different theories, but it occurred to me that there could be an analogy.
Okay,
I'm not sure about that analogy. You said circuit 5 is focusing inwards on the gestalt, right?
So circuit 5, the neurosomatic,
psychosomatic, neurosomatic.
peak experiences, and
that does sound kind of right to me. That's focusing inwards and on these holistic experiences.
And then what was circuit 6?
Circuit 6 was outwards.
Neurogenetic.
Right.
Focusing outwards on the features. And that's referring to the collective neurogenetic circuit, which is talking about things like archetypes, deja vu, synchronicity, collective unconscious. That that I can see.
Okay, so 5 and 6 are both.
They're completely flip-flop.
Features.
They're inverse.
Oh, one is inwards and gestalt, and the other is outward and features.
Yeah.
We're
And
testing.
what did you say about 7?
Right now. 7 would be inwards on the gestalt, on the gestalt.
Inwards on the features.
Inward on features.
Inward on features.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to get down to the nitty gritty and change the
Oh,
details.
you're right. You're right. Sorry.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So you're kind of reprogramming your reality tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 8th one would be outward and gestalt. Right.
Non-local
That
quantum.
seems like a pretty good analogy. Yeah. I think I like your model, Ariel.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Took me a bit to think about it.
It seems pretty good, but I don't know how successfully you could reprogram yourself without understanding the gestalt.
Can you explain that a little more, Katie?
I feel like in order to be able to successfully reprogram your reality tunnel, you need to not only understand like the little individual features you do, but I feel like you also need to have a holistic sense of how to make that change happen within yourself.
Well, I think this is why Wilson and Leary put this circuit at number 7, because you kind of need to have some understanding of circuits 5 and 6 before this one will really work.
Right. I feel like you need to employ the tools of circuit 5 in order to really reprogram yourself.
Yeah, these upper circuits definitely seem to work together.
There's an interesting thing, actually. Leary placed the Metaprogrammer at circuit 6 and the neurogenetic circuit at circuit 7. And in some of his books, Robert Anton Wilson stuck with Leary's ordering, but in this book, he made the Metaprogrammer circuit 7. So it's interesting because there is some ambiguity as to 7.
That is interesting.
Yeah, well, one seems to be, so the similarity between 8 and 6 would be that they seem to be collective, right? There's this kind of collective neurogenetic thing, and circuit 8, which we'll talk about in a bit, is this kind of, collective or like universal consciousness or awareness. Whereas 5 and 7 seem to be more inward, or your individual rather than collective. Jung would probably call them like introverted versus extroverted.
It's interesting because Circuit 6 does kind of bridge the individual and the collective.
Yes. Honestly, I think it makes more sense to me reversed, with the metaprogrammer being Circuit 6 and the collective neurogenetic systems being Circuit 7.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the order of the circuits, it has significance in a couple of different ways. One of them is that you encounter these circuits in that order as you're developing. Another might be that life itself, as it's evolving, encounters these circuits in that order. And another might be that there's a sort of dependence that happens where you need to have a certain familiarity and comfort with this circuit before you move on to this next circuit.
I mean, it almost gets back to the debate we had back on the crypto hippie drum circle of whether it's better to start with mushrooms and go to acid, or start with acid and go to mushrooms.
I think every question in life comes back to that.
Can you give me a quick recap on that
answer
debate? What was the main point?
The main point was, I tried to generalize that people should start doing psychedelics with mushrooms, and you said you disagreed, that it was fine or even better to start with acid. With acid being more similar to the metaprogrammer, or activating that kind of personality more, and mushrooms activating more of the neurogenetic circuit.
Oh, you're right. I remember this now. I thought that I wasn't there, but now I totally remember this.
Wait, is that true? Is that true? Psilocybin, like, does Wilson say that? Like, psilocybin access is number 6 and LSD is number 7?
Yeah, they can both they can both do both, but they have more, like, they tend towards.
Interesting.
Absolutely. I've heard that mushrooms is kind of like you're taking on a wild fantasy car ride, and acid is kind of like you're driving the car in a wild augmented reality.
Yeah, that is. I mean, this conversation is it's resonating with my experience. I did have mushrooms before I had acid, and mushrooms is definitely a lot more of the archetype thing, where you think about symbols and, you know, narratives and, like, yeah.
Yeah, my only mushroom trip was me basically on a hero's journey, trying to figure out if I could bake a cake while I was tripping on mushrooms. And if I could, then I would succeed in life. And if I failed, then I would never be able to do anything.
And you succeeded, right?
I did succeed. I succeeded. You were trying to discourage me the whole time. You were like, you can't make a cake while you're on mushrooms.
Yeah, and I was like, hey, come on, just enjoy it. Like,
Chris is being the trickster archetype.
This is gonna be like 10 times harder than baking a cake while sober, and you're gonna enjoy the experience a lot more if you just relax and enjoy it.
I enjoyed that baking experience very much.
Chris is totally like Loki of that hero's journey.
Yeah.
He absolutely was. He absolutely was.
What are you talking about?
He was bouncing around.
God. You were the adversary.
I'm not evil, Ariel.
Loki's not evil.
You weren't evil. You were a trickster. You would pop in and, like, play a little song, or, like, do a little dance, or do, like, woo, or something like that.
All right. Hail Eris, you guys. So Katie, what was the treasure that you brought back from the depths of chaos?
An Oreo birthday cake.
All right. I guess that's a value to humanity and society.
It's a victory against entropy.
Mm-hmm. It was a victory against entropy.
Okay, so I guess this 7th circuit, we should be thinking LSD, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm 100% metaprogrammer on LSD. It's just like I'm thinking about metacognition constantly the whole time. That's
so one of the things that I thought was really interesting that Wilson brings up about Circuit 7 is he talks about the magic room where you have an omniscient computer, and you can ask the computer any question, and as long as you really, really ask a clear question with no doubts, then it will give you the right answer. And I guess LSD is a little bit like that.
It totally is. And like that's kind of like the paradox of LSD, because like it, if you use it properly and you like are like consciously using it to improve yourself, you can rapidly like upgrade your brain like in a few hours. But you can also like just destroy yourself completely on it really quickly if you ask the wrong questions.
Yeah, it reminds me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42. And the whole process of life on Earth since the beginning of time is the process of asking the correct question.
Basically just super activates your brain. So you can like, if you're like on like a process of like self-discovery and you're like navigating it carefully, you can, but you know, if you're like, it iterates so quickly. Like your thoughts can iterate so quickly. So if you go on like a negative thought pattern or start with some kind of negative behavior, it really can be dangerous.
Yeah, it reminds me of how Wilson was talking about for the third circuit. It's this like cocaine high where, you know, all of society, if society becomes too rational, then society becomes very progressive, right? And things are progressing very, very rapidly. And then you need the fourth circuit to kind of tamp down on that and be the conservative force and be like, no, actually, you know, let's not go off the rails. Let's not change everything too fast, because when you start, when you start using that rational process, you get this kind of exponential increase in like understanding and change. But you can also kind of fly off the rails, and bad things can happen.
Yeah, totally. Like that's where like Wilson talks about like circuits 1 and 2, and probably circuit 5, maybe circuit 6, but they're like homeostatic circuits. So like with the survival instinct, it's like approach, retreat. Like it's all about achieving like the right homeostasis, or in the right, sometimes you're approaching, sometimes you're retreating, and it's a feedback loop. But with circuit 3, it's not cyclical at all. It's completely linear. And circuit 7 is as well, because they're both rational circuits.
That's really interesting that you talk about this process of approach and retreat, which is the first circuit. And what I was talking about was how rationality is like approach and morality is like retreat. And it's almost like the third and fourth circuits are kind of like an outgrowth of circuit 1.
I was just going to say that's interesting. I've never thought about morality as a retreat, but it does kind of make sense. Rationality gives you the power to do a lot of things, and morality is where you place restrictions based on certain rules that make sense and are good.
We were so focused on if we could do it that we never stopped to think if we should.
Right.
Well, I wonder if this is why Wilson put the metaprogramming circuit as number 7, because it's analogous to the rational third circuit. And maybe the 8th circuit is analogous to the fourth morality circuit in some way.
How do you feel about the ordering, Ariel and Kurt? Should you do mushrooms or acid first?
Oh, that ordering?
It's the same question, right?
Why was 6 afraid of 7?
42. Okay, I'd say it's mushrooms first, but I don't really know. Actually, I've never taken a full mushroom trip. I've taken microdoses, and maybe somewhere above a microdose where it was perceptible. But it's hard for me to say. But I'd say mushrooms. My friend says to me that mushrooms are more analog and LSD is more digital. So mushrooms come along on a smooth ride upwards, whereas LSD is like on this staircase, jagged movements upward, and that means it can catch you off guard. So I'd say from that perspective, it's just it would be comparatively easy to take mushrooms first because you can ride it more smoothly.
I think it would be interesting to go back and experience mushrooms, or to think about mushrooms in the context of the archetypes, because I did feel like there was something else or something in the background that was kind of driving the story of my experience. And I didn't like that because I thought that it was random. So it felt like noise to me when I was trying to interpret what I was learning. Like, man, why was there all this importance on baking this cake? Maybe that was a silly trip, but it would be interesting to go back and approach it with kind of a Jungian framework in mind and see if that fit or made the experience resonate more.
Yeah, so we should all take mushrooms and sit down with a bunch of archetypes and try to conjure an archetype or ask questions about a particular archetype.
You know, the Lion King is full of archetypes.
I'm sure it is. That's why it's an enduring story, I suppose.
Yeah, actually, a lot of the Disney movies are full of archetypes. So Jordan Peterson has this great lecture series on the Lion King, and
you know what else the Lion King is full of? Plagiarism.
Never.
All right, cultural appropriation too. Yeah, throw that in there.
All right, so what else do we want to talk about with Circuit 7?
Okay, maybe we could talk a little bit more about the relationship between Circuit 7 and Circuit 3. Because there's a very strong relationship between the two, the two rational circuits. And it's through Circuit 7 that we can transcend the reality tunnels we built in Circuit 3.
Yeah, it does seem that Circuit 7 functions in sort of a rational way. Like you're stepping back and you're seeing yourself and how you operate and all of your little programs that are running without, normally they just operate. You don't really think about what they're doing. And then you can kind of watch all of that as it happens and figure out where the bugs are, and you can debug them basically.
This definitely makes me think of my last ayahuasca journey, where I was inside my mind's control center, just started fiddling with the knobs, and then I was traveling through the pipes and saw this program, which was just a series of branching lines. And I was like, all right, so that's my entire personality then. And that's basically what all humans are.
It sounds like your ayahuasca trip was presenting your seventh circuit to you in terms of circuit 6. It was giving you this like very clear visual image of the inside of your brain.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what it seemed like. Yeah.
In that way, like, it almost does make sense in a way that it comes after 6, because it's through I can see it going both ways actually, because they almost seem like they're in a feedback loop. It seems like through like the images and the archetypes and the symbols of circuit 6, like if we buy into circuit 6, then it's necessary to know them in order to fully understand yourself. Because circuit 7 is kind of about bringing stuff that's in the unconscious into the conscious. And then once it's there, you can kind of transcend it. Mm-hmm. So much of what's in the unconscious is circuit 6 material. But you can also say that if circuit 7 comes first, then maybe that's like delving into like the personal unconscious and straightening out the course of your life. And then once that happens, straightening out the events that have taken place in your life and like your patterns that you've picked up in this lifetime. And then once that happens, you can go into like the genetic memory and then deeper into like the species memory and access circuit 6.
I can see advantages to going either way. To answer your first question about how I see circuit 7 related to circuit 3, I see circuit 7 as basically revealing all of the unconscious processes that programmed circuit 3 in the past, so that you can fiddle with them and maybe create new reality tunnels, new circuit 3s.
Yeah. So when somebody is really stuck in circuit 3, it is like really linear, and they kind of have to follow it all the way along. But circuit 7 is more where it starts to branch, when you have options.
Circuit 7 is like taking...
Like what?
Like it's like another dimension.
Yeah. Get you off your rails. You see that there are other rails you can take.
Yeah. Wilson says the seventh circuit is about ideas, mathematics about mathematics, language about language, consciousness of consciousness. the whole seventh circuit brings us into what Hofstadter calls strange loops.
So circuit 3 is thinking a thought. Circuit 7 is thinking a thought about a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And mathematics and language and consciousness.
Do you think circuit 7 can reprogram the other circuits, like circuits 1, 2, 4?
Yes.
Probably, at least a little bit. Maybe not completely, but yeah.
I don't think that you can reprogram circuits 1, 2, and 4, like the very baseline of them. I don't think that you can reprogram like maybe you could reprogram where you want to be on the dominance hierarchy, for example, in circuit 2, but I don't think that you can get rid of the dominance hierarchy completely. You can become aware of it so that you can mitigate it. Same thing with your survival instincts. I think through circuit 7, you can become aware of it so you can mitigate it or inhabit any space along those spectrums. But I don't think that you can get rid of those spectrums altogether.
But it's like if you have an unhealthy relationship with food or with smoking, then you could adjust that.
Yeah.
What about people that are like really intense about it, like the Buddha, or like people who like become yogis or do nothing but meditate for years and years? Like, it seems like those like people who really, really get intense about mysticism, like it seems like they almost kind of do transcend survival instinct and dominance hierarchies and sexuality and stuff like that.
I think it when Wilson says, I can't remember where that section is where he talks about how they trained the process of picking who was going to be in the Illuminati and the Order of Assassins, but there's this scene where they drug the guy and they bring him into this like heavenly gardens, like the most like indescribably beautiful scene with a bunch of beautiful women, and he has like this amazing sexual experience with them, and then the guy that says, wow, that was the greatest thing ever, I want to do that forever and ever and ever, and he doesn't realize basically that his mind is capable of, like, the experience was given to him by his mind. He thinks that if he thinks that the experience came from like the external world, then he goes into this Order of Assassins. And if he realizes that his mind is capable of having this experience whenever it wants, then he becomes a member of the Illuminati. And so it's almost like that. It reminds me of your mind is, when you realize that your mind is actually capable of giving you all of the things that the other circuits are supposed to give you, then that allows you to transcend them, I would say.
I think that in order to transcend some of these really base circuits, on some level you would need to transcend your body, and maybe that's more of a circuit 8 thing. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know if you need to transcend your body. I mean, maybe to a certain degree, but I think you can ignore that your body is there, or you can do this sort of neurosomatic thing that we were talking about earlier with circuit 5, where you can use your mind in order to essentially provide all that your body needs so that you don't keep getting distracted by your body.
I don't know though, but I mean, circuit 5 is like so sensual. It's like you smoke pot, you're like, you want food and you want comfort and you want sex. Like it makes you more sensual, not less sensual.
I think that mastery of circuit 5 is where you can use that circuit to meet your body's needs. Use your mind to meet your body's needs. If you're just smoking weed and you haven't mastered circuit 5, then like basically the idea behind circuit 5 is that you can have all those experiences just by thinking about them, basically by using your imagination, essentially.
This might be a good way to segue into circuit 8, because I feel like it's kind of edging into the discussion anyway. Chris, do you want to introduce us?
Sure. So circuit 8 is known as the non-local quantum circuit. It has to do with quantum consciousness and non-local awareness. It definitely is one of probably the hardest circuit in the book to really grasp. It's very abstract. Wilson says that you can access it with Kundalini. There's this Kundalini awakening idea from yoga, from going to shock, from near-death experiences, from DMT, high doses of LSD, or almost any dose of ketamine. I mean, so the way that I see Circuit 8 is it's this kind of, well, let me say what I was going to say about Circuit 7 really quick. I lost it, but okay. So he says that in Circuit 7, he says that mind is this thing that the universe invented to look at itself. But as Alan Watts says, the tongue cannot taste itself. And so Circuit 8 is kind of the universe itself, like without a subject and an object division. It's just, the universe, the base layer of the universe, whatever that matter energy stuff is. And he says that we can either see this as pure consciousness or we can see this as pure information. Those are the two ways that he likes looking at Circuit 8. So what do you guys think about Circuit 8?
I don't know if I've ever quite experienced that, but maybe. It really sounds like the last stage of yoga, that's samadhi. And it's quite an achievement if somebody can get there through meditation. It's like almost having an absence of mind or being, it's like the actual union, the actual yoga, being one with everything.
I don't think I've touched this yet. I think I've had tiny glimmers of maybe the outer edge, but I don't think I've hit this yet.
I think this circuit is at the root of the question we keep asking of like, what is really there? Like, is it a pattern that we're projecting onto like the inchoate chaos that is existence, or are there actual patterns that we're perceiving imperfectly? And I think it also bridges that philosophical question with a lot of what we've been talking about in quantum physics. Like quantum physics seems to be pointing to some kind of weird explanation of how the universe really is. And there's a few possible configurations that make sense. Like Wilson, he seems to be arguing for an ordered universe, which is either made up of consciousness or of information. But I mean, quantum physics could also imply a random universe, like a level of existence at which all order and pattern break down. And I think this circuit is about experiencing that deepest level of reality.
Yeah, so I have a couple of different ways of looking at this circuit. I see it as the software. So Wilson spends a lot of time talking about hardware and software, and how hardware has a location and a shape and a location. And software doesn't have doesn't exist in time or space. It's just there. And you can make lots of copies of it. And to me, it seems like he's trying to say that Circuit 8 is the software. And, all of the other circuits are more or less, a little bit, I think we're going from like hardware to software. Like I think Circuit 1 is like the most hardware level and Circuit 8 is like the most software level.
Can I ask you a question? When you're talking about the hardware and the software levels, do you mean that Circuit 1 is the most hardware level of ourselves and Circuit 8 is the most software level of ourselves? Or are you talking about the hardware and software of all that is?
I would say it's both. Actually, that segues into the thing that I was going to say. So I think the lower circuits 1 through 4, are where we see ourselves as like an individual. Like it's the individual observing the universe and interacting with the universe. And the upper circuits 5 through 8 seem to be the universe is using us to look at itself. And so when you ask about is this the hardware or the software of the universe, I think collectively, so this is again what Ariel was saying, like collectively we are the universe, or we are the consciousness of the universe. And I think this circuit 8 is kind of what Vervaeke talks about when he talks about or Nietzsche talks about when they talk about will. They talk about God being like this force that's shaping things and seems to have some kind of intelligence. Actually, that's another word that Wilson brings up in relation to circuit 8. It's like this kind of just like universal intelligence. And so is it hardware or software? To me, it seems to be software. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Kind of. I'm having difficulty with the hardware and software metaphor, because when I'm thinking about circuit 8, I'm thinking about the most base thing. And I wouldn't think of it as being either hardware or software.
Yeah. So it's not a perfect analogy, but part of it is, like Wilson says, hardware is a thing that you can pick up and you can touch and you can put it on your shelf. And because of that, you can say it's more real. But software is a thing that even if you destroy the hardware, the software is still going to exist somewhere else. So it's very hard to destroy. So in that sense, it's more real. And so that's why, like with this circuit, it's called a non-local circuit. And I think that's the sense that you're trying to get at, Chris, especially that it's non-local. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess we should explain what's meant by non-local. Wilson actually goes into Bell's theorem, which talks about how information can travel faster than the speed of light, basically, and that's actually one of the interpretations of quantum mechanics.
Basically, Bell's theorem, check out our episode on quantum physics for more information about this. Basically, Bell's theorem establishes that the universe doesn't function in the way that the classical Newtonian universe suggests that it might. So where you have like particles with properties that travel through the universe and have direct cause and effect relationships with each other, Bell's theorem basically is one of the findings of quantum physics that proves that it doesn't function that way, and that you either have to have faster than light travel, or you have to have non-local, like variables that are like embedded in the environment, like not in the objects themselves, or you have to have multiple universes. Like you have to have something really weird going on to make the results of Bell's theorem to be consistent with the results of Bell's theorem.
Yeah. So just to read the summary that Wilson says, he says, it's highly technical, but in ordinary language, it amounts to something like this. There are no isolated systems. Every particle in the universe is in instantaneous, faster than light communication with every other particle. The whole system, even the parts that are separated by cosmic distances, functions as a whole system.
I feel like here, like we got to understand, like Wilson is like putting forward like a specific interpretation of Bell's theorem, and he's putting forward a specific philosophy of how the universe works, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and he even uses out-of-body experiences to kind of, I think what he's trying to do there is, so an out-of-body experience would be like if you're lying on the operating table or something like that, and suddenly you can feel your consciousness rising above your body, and you can look down and see your body. So I think he's maybe suggesting that, consciousness does not necessarily arise from the brain. Like it arises from the universe, and the brain is just one place that it happens to be sometimes. But it's really just this kind of, like this instantaneous information field that permeates everything.
Yes, and as Ariel said, this is definitely Wilson's interpretation. Consciousness as a concept, it's not even agreed upon what it means, let alone if it's universal or separate from your body or anything along those lines. But this is an interesting model, certainly.
He kind of puts forward, like, it's a valid model. It's consistent with the findings, but he puts forward another explanation that it could be information, not consciousness, which is also a popular explanation these days. But he doesn't really suggest the idea that that it's just chaos. That at a quantum level, it's just chaos and randomness, and that it's acausal. There's just no causality at all, which is also a popular interpretation. And which would mean that in the 8th circuit, it's like part of the reason it's so hard to remember, so hard to like put into words, is because it's just experiencing pure chaos.
Yeah, and he talks about how information is also known as neg entropy, which is negative entropy, where just localized pockets where the entropy is falling rather than increasing. And this connects to a lot of our other episodes where we talk about how life appears to be doing this. Life and consciousness appear to be creating this localized pocket of negative entropy.
Yeah, you could develop a whole philosophy around the idea that we live in a universe where chaos rules and entropy is the vector of chaos. And at a fundamental level, chaos is the most true thing that exists, and consciousness is in rebellion against it, but it's destined to lose. Kind of like existentialism, I guess.
It sounds like a decent religion. I don't know if you want to submit it to the.
And how do you make money off that?
For solving the meaning crisis.
Tithing and donations, obviously.
How do you make plastic surgery?
Throw money into the void.
And if you want consciousness to win, just come try out our consciousness building program on discount for $2,499
it's only
down.
Or all of your life savings, whichever is greater.
Okay, that's a great idea, guys. I'm gonna start my own cult.
We're not evil, we swear.
We're just tricksters.
Next up on the Multiversity, join our new group. We have a live-in compound, lots of
Weapons
tasty
and poison.
food.
Oh, yes.
We have what? Did you say weapons? Of course.
We're highly armed.
I mean, we can't be a real
Women
cult unless we're stockpiling weapons, right?
Exactly.
I mean, just learned how to brainwash people from Wilson. There'll be a period of isolation and spiritual fasting
To help you reach your higher circuits.
Exactly.
followed by ritual humiliation. Okay, this is getting a little dark.
Come live in the Multiversity projects.
It even sounds like a call to the Multiversity.
We have sex.
Yes.
No, celibacy.
Sell it with sex. 1960s cult style.
We're a human potential movement cult, right? What else would we be? Anyway.
So Wilson is definitely a futurist.
We're definitely joking, by the way, audience. Anyway, sorry.
The laughter is just to trick you. Anyway. Okay.
So Wilson is definitely a futurist, and he this is one of the things where I definitely disagree with him a lot on, where he talks about, people are going to be immortal really soon, and since technology is increasing, and information is increasing at an exponential rate, that within our lifetimes, there's going to be pills that you can take to just stave off death.
I also disagree with Wilson that we're going to reach immortality by 2007.
How do you know?
Yeah, I remember just reading that and being like, nope.
The babies born in 2007 could potentially be immortal.
Potentially.
Yeah. So of course Wilson died in 2007. So I guess that's why that year is.
Oh, I didn't mean to.
It's immortalized in our hearts.
It was just around the time when he said he was hoping there would be immortality. So I guess that's that irony.
But yeah, I mean, so that
That's
just
a
means that his
bummer.
body just kind of, his consciousness left his body, but that doesn't mean, that he's dead. That's probably
That's what
he's
we'd like to think.
He really wanted to be immortal, though. Like, he wanted his physical body to be immortal.
All right,
Which is
but failing
interesting,
that,
given that he thinks that consciousness is non-local.
I mean, but failing that, like, you should be able to upload your consciousness to a computer and live out the rest of your immortality, the rest of your eternal existence as software, as like computer software, as opposed to human software.
Sure, I just question why, if you believe in the system of consciousness in the universe that Wilson put forward in his books, that you would not want to experience that oneness.
Maybe he was hedging his bets. His whole
Wait,
thing
you're saying
about his whole thing about moving between reality tunnels.
True. True.
I mean, maybe he just moved into such a different reality tunnel that he's no longer in our reality tunnel, but he's in some kind of reality tunnel. Remember
Quantum immortality.
Remember many worlds?
Sure.
Yeah. So, there's some reality in which Robert Anton Wilson is immortal. We're just not in it.
Hang on. I don't think, he didn't freeze himself. I'm not actually sure. I think he was considering freezing himself and he didn't.
This is a bit of a tangent. Do you think that if you access something like Circuit 8 or a true egoless, timeless moment, that is a form of immortality within the infinite loop of that moment? Do you think that that's possible?
Well, sometimes I see it as like, this kind of came up in Viveki as well. It's like normal time we live horizontally, and then when you have a mystical experience, a transcendental experience, or you take a lot of psychedelic drugs, you get this high spike, and it's like this, you're living life vertically. So in those hours, it's like time doesn't exist, or time flows very differently there. And you could have the experience of time being infinite in that moment. So yeah, that's a kind of immortality.
I mean, I've had such an experience. We were talking about mushrooms earlier. I took way more mushrooms than I meant to one time. And I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this on other episodes. But
how a great story begins.
Yeah, basically, I remember experiencing my own, I felt like I was dying. And then I felt like I'd been reborn. And I was like, whoa, reincarnation is true or something. And then I was like, oh no, the universe is dying. And then the universe died. And then there was nothing. And then there was like this new universe. And I was like, whoa, I guess there's like a multiverse, or there's some kind of like time is just, there's so much time. Like the amount of time that I thought there's like infinitely more time than that. And I just kept experiencing like these, I guess as we were talking about in like fractals of time, where I'd experience like one length of time, and then I would experience like 1,000 times more than that, and then like 1,000 times more than that, and then 1,000 times more than that. And I definitely, in my crazy drug-addled mind, I definitely experienced, like eternity, I would say. And I felt how I connected to everything, and the importance that I played in the universe and all of the universes. And
cool.
You can definitely think about those things. I don't know if they're true, but
I mean, one thing that's interesting is in the Cosmic Trigger, Robert Anton Wilson wrote that like between like 1962 and 1972, Timothy Leary seemed to get 10 years younger. A commentary, obviously, on doing like a ton of psychedelic drugs. And I've had this idea for a while that like when you do psychedelics, it does something to you that makes you younger in some way, or that has some kind of rejuvenating effect. Whereas when you do amphetamines or stimulants, it accelerates your aging process while you're on them.
And it's kind of funny that experiencing eternity would slow things down for you.
Yeah, because relative to eternity, we're so young. I'm 31 years old, 31 out of a billion is, I'm like a little baby.
Yeah.
I think you're right in some very interesting ways. I don't know about the slowing down time, if that literally gives you more youth, but I do think that taking psychedelics, it brings your brain back to a more plastic state, a more childlike state, a more malleable state. And something like amphetamines, the way I understand the body as a system is parts wear down, and when cells go through their cycles and have to reproduce, then there's sometimes errors, and then eventually those add up to where we kind of break down as people over time with entropy. And if you're taking stimulants, you're making all of that happen faster. So I don't see how you wouldn't be aging yourself in a literal sense.
Right. You're basically setting fire to your life force. So it feels great, but you're damaging yourself.
Chris, would you say that that experience of eternity, was that an experience of the eighth non-local quantum circuit?
It's hard to say. I would say if anything in my life has been an experience of the eighth circuit, it was that. Yeah. And Vervaeke talks about how, you can either, and we were talking about this earlier, you can go down from the gestalt to the features, and you can go inward, or you can go outward, and you can go, so there's these two axis thing. And so you can go, you can meditate, or you can contemplate, or you can do both at the same time. And when you do both at the same time, then you experience like going all the way into eternity and all the way out to eternity. And I thought about my crazy mushroom experience when I was watching that as well. So yeah, he said that's the third kind of mystical experience, which is, yeah.
Oh, okay, because one is meditation, going within, one is contemplation, going without, and then third is combining both of them. I see.
Close encounters of the third kind.
Just from listening to your account of the experience, I would be willing to like ring the buzzer and give you the 8th Circuit Award.
Cool. Yeah,
yeah.
What are you going to say, Kurt?
There's a meditation practice that I tried to do, and this isn't. It's kind of funny because the way it was given to me was just as the mantra, so hum, which means I am that, or that is, and to break it down, saying the individual consciousness is entirely equivalent to the universal consciousness. And so going through this meditation, you start, I think it's the out breath is so, and the in breath is hum, and you just think through it in your mind. And I would go through and try to stack levels upon it. So breathing out, I would focus on my own individual consciousness, and then breathing in, focus on the whole universal consciousness, and then try to on every in breath and out breath, I'd say I have the focus on the individual consciousness, but still be aware of the universal consciousness. And then on the in breath, have the focus on the universal consciousness and the awareness of the individual consciousness, and then try to bring it all together, bring it on home. I was shooting for what Vervaeke was talking about, this combination of meditation and contemplation.
Okay, so are you talking about like hum sa?
So hamsa is actually the other. Grammatically, it's the reverse. So hum. Breathing out. It's kind of weird because in our culture we think that breathing in is the first thing, but in Indian culture they think that breathing out is the first thing. So they think that when a baby is born, the first thing it does is breathe out. So
is out.
So is out, and then hum is in. So if you were doing it as hamsa, it would be hum is out and sa is in. So
okay,
hamsa is like saying that is me.
So I used to go to these guided meditations in Dallas where they had these big speakers, and they would have this like guru or something. It was the guy with an Indian accent who would guide you through these meditations. And I remember the hum sa or the sa hum thing because like they would put you in this dark room and you'd lie down on a yoga mat and get some blankets and you try to relax as much as you could. And it was actually a place called the Divine Sight Healing Arts Center. And the point of it was you were supposed to relax and heal by meditating. And I remember when I heard those sounds, and I don't know, there's a thing in like Indian culture where like sounds can trigger, like certain syllables can trigger certain like chakras and stuff. And I remember when those syllables were uttered by the guru or whoever, I just felt like this really powerful, like goosebumps and like relaxation. And I was like, whoa, maybe there is something to this. Like, like certain sounds can activate different parts of your brain or something like that. But yeah, maybe that's what was happening.
Yes.
Maybe I was having this like inner and outer thing.
Yes. Well, I think I do kind of think that when somebody focuses on something and they practice it a lot, it's like they imbue those sounds with their intention, and so that can affect you.
Yeah, and actually, if you guys have never tried Yoga Nidra, you should try it. It's great.
Have not. That sounds interesting though, and this is going to sound like some real woo, but I do believe on every level we're at some level kind of made up of vibrations, and maybe the medium of sound isn't so different from the medium of matter as we perceive it. So it doesn't surprise me that certain sounds can impact how you feel. I mean, we know certain sounds can impact how you feel through music, or sounds that are too noisy can actually physically harm you. So it's not surprising to me at all that certain sounds could affect you emotionally.
I mean, in quantum physics, it does kind of say that we're somehow both particles and waves. Like one way to look at the universe that I've thought about a bit is this idea that everything, like at some point in time, everything was a waveform. Everything was a wave, and somehow consciousness emerged or information emerged, and that caused a chain reaction where a lot of the waves collapsed into particles, and that's why we like perceive ourselves as particles, and we have a particle nature to some extent, that we're some cross section of a collapsed waveform.
Yeah, well, so all quantum systems have a quantum waveform, and so a human body can the wave function. The wave function of any quantum system can be calculated. Things that are macroscopic are sort of prohibitively difficult to calculate what that wave function would be. But yeah, basically, every piece of matter can be seen as particles or waves. And when you see a system as a bunch of waves, there's actually one waveform where you combine them all together. And the way that sound works is the same, and the way that light works is, the way that light works is the same. So sound, when you have the reason why your ears can hear two sounds that happen simultaneously is because, you just take this wave over here and this wave over here, and you do them at the same time, and they add together, and your brain can basically runs some processing algorithms on that and pulls apart the signatures of the two different sounds. But it's, basically you can take two sounds together as one sound. And so you can take 10 sounds together as one sound, and you can take a billion sounds together as one sound. Radio waves work the same and all that. So, but I think that what Wilson is talking about, and he says it a couple times in the Circuit 8 chapter, is that this is what people mean when they talk about God. This kind of like cosmic intelligence that you can access through kind of altered states. And it may or may not be very difficult to understand or even think about. But it appears to be there, and a lot of people have a common experience of it.
So what circuits do you guys think? What do you guys think your relationships are to the circuits? Like, which ones do you think you live on? Which one do you think you've experienced?
I try to live a lot on circuit 5, the neurosomatic bliss circuit. So I try to have more peak experiences. I try to be happier and find different ways to help myself be happy. It doesn't always work, but it works a lot.
Do you have aspirations of moving to the ones that are 6, 7, and 8, Kurt?
Yes, but I don't know if I can live there. Maybe I can, but I wouldn't know at the moment. I still don't know what that would look like. I guess if you were really living in Circuit 8, that would be being some kind of enlightened being, and you probably have a very different experience of the world. I can kind of imagine what it would be like to live at level 7. Like it would be every day you manage to change something about yourself, or every hour you manage to improve yourself somehow, or experiment with your beliefs, something like that. So I guess I got a taste of that when I did that owl experiment. I kept trying to change between the two hypotheses and try to earnestly believe them every time. So I guess I got a glimpse of that. Circuit 6, the neurogenetic circuit, collective unconscious. That's, yeah, it's still hard for me to imagine what that would look like if I tried to do that day to day. I guess it would be like if I meditate every day and I feel like I'm in contact with the ancestral knowledge that's hidden within me or something like that. I guess that happens sometimes.
Yeah, so the way that I see Circuit 5 is that it helps you. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to master all the circuits. I think that's kind of the goal of the 8-circuit model. Like Circuit 1, when you have problems on Circuit 1, you have to pull yourself out into Circuit 5 before you can begin to work on your Circuit 1 and perfect it. And when I quit my job a few years ago to go work on my health, that's what I was doing. My subconscious was telling me like, hey, your Circuit 1 is fucked up and you need to do something about it. And I had to give myself time and space in order to figure out which things made me happy and which things made me sad, and to come up with increasingly better strategies to put myself into a good state of mind, and sort of master the first circuit. And I think maybe Wilson is trying to align the other circuits in a similar way, where the 6th circuit helps you master the 2nd circuit. Yeah, just taking your ancestral knowledge to, I don't know, understand hierarchies or something like that. Maybe that one's not as good. Or maybe it is. Maybe, we form dominance hierarchies based on the collective unconscious, based on people that we see who we think, oh, that person is a leader, because they embody my idea of what a leader should look like. And then Circuit 3, your rationality circuit, I guess you need a little bit of the circuit, the metaprogramming circuit, in order to perfect that one. And then finally, Circuit 4 is morality. That one appears to me to be like, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson have that debate about whether you can have morality without religion. And I think that's relevant to Circuit 4. Like Circuit 3 is like, how do we solve problems, and what's, how do we understand the world? And Circuit 4 is morality. It's like, which things should we do?
Chris, which circuit do you think you live on?
I mean, I think it changes. I think Wilson says, people should be well-rounded. People should be able to live on any of the circuits. I think the one that I tend to live on is the one that I'm trying to master, maybe. So that would probably be, I don't know. Yeah, like Circuit 4 and Circuit 6 maybe are the ones that I'm kind of weak on, that I'm working on. I feel like just a couple short years ago, I was pretty weak on like all 4 lower circuits. And then the last few years, I've kind of been mastering those, and I feel a lot more comfortable with myself. Yeah, if I just had to pick one circuit, I don't think I could do that. Sorry.
How about you, Katie?
I think that growing up, I was really, really heavy on circuits 3 and 4. Like really, really heavy on circuits 3 and 4. I had at any given time some kind of rationally thought out system of ethics, like some kind of framework that I was living in all the time, and constantly trying to embody that or argue it or debate it based on what my beliefs were at the time. I'm talking mostly about like my middle school years, teen years into early 20s. I think that broke down a couple of years ago when I had one of those ecstatic experiences, I guess you could say. Knocked me out of my reality tunnel a little bit. These days, I think I'm pretty heavy on circuit 7, and I'm trying to utilize circuit 7 to get better at circuit 5 right now. And circuit 6 is just barely starting to creep its way into my life. I really didn't pay any attention to myths or archetypes or ancient wisdom or any of these kinds of things when I was younger. I think I was kind of aggressively atheist, and one thing that I did was really like set myself on a mission to try to weed out everything that was a cultural bias and try to build things from the ground up. And so I really disregarded a lot of that ancestral knowledge, I guess you could say. And I'm just starting to be more open to that now. But I'd say that I'm probably circuit 7 dominant at the moment, working on circuit 5 and 6. How about you?
I think in the past, I've been very stuck on circuit 4. I think I probably wasn't properly imprinted on circuit 4. Like when I was reading the first half of the book, I was like, circuit 1, okay, I'm all the well-adjusted column. Circuit 2, I'm the well-adjusted column. Circuit 3, all good. And then I got to circuit 4 and I was like, I'm every single one in the non-well-adjusted column. But I think I've managed to work through a lot of that, I hope, and still work in progress. I think I have a high level of mastery or competence in circuit 3, and so it's easy for me to fall back on that one. I think when I go through changes, it's like my comfort zone. Like when I go through changes, I can just fall back on circuit 3, and it yields certain rewards. Like I can make money using circuit 3. I can impress people using circuit 3. But I have to kind of be vigilant not to live there too much, because I feel like still even now it's like all too easy to just find myself like in social interactions and stuff and being like, oh, I'm just totally circuit 3 in this interaction. And sometimes like circuit 3 with some combination of like hostility. So I have to be careful. I definitely think I still spend a lot of time in the lower circuits. I think I've always struggled with circuit 5. I think like the feeling that cannabis gives, it's hard for me to access some of those feelings on my own. But I feel like I've made progress in the past couple of years by like really focusing on like bodily practices and having a more like I think when I was younger, I probably like disregarded my body a lot, because I was like, sometimes I was almost like that in the book. Like he talks about someone who's like all head. Like I was just like, I'm just a head, and like the body it just needs to get me to where I need to go so that the head can do its job. And I think in the past few years, I've transcended that a bit. Like I've paid a lot more attention to my health and my fitness, and even to like spiritual or ecstatic practices that involve my body. I've definitely had some intense circuit 7 experiences. But I feel like every time I have a circuit 7 experience, I'm like, okay, now this is really circuit 7. I've totally got circuit 7. I'm in circuit 7. And then the next time something happens, it's like, oh, that wasn't circuit 7 at all. This is circuit 7. And so it's almost like what Chris was talking about how like you have like you're the subject looking at what's happening, and you're like, there, the subject and the object, they're over there, see them? And then like later on, you're like, oh, wait, that where I was before, that's the subject, and that whole thing that I was looking at is the object, and you just keep recursing. And I also feel like circuit 7, like having like intense circuit 7 experiences like has helped me. Like sometimes it's been accompanied by like intense like circuit 5 like subjective experience. Like intense bodily like feelings, like almost like that bliss feeling. And so I feel like for me, those two are very connected, or maybe just in the one direction, like circuit 7 can provide circuit 5 activation. With circuit 6, it's hard to know because I don't exactly know what I think I've definitely spent time on circuit 6. I've definitely spent time building reality tunnels that have a lot to do with like mythology and archetypes and stuff like that. And I think I've had experiences at that level. I think I've been moved by some of the things I've experienced. So I don't think it's just circuit 3 looking at circuit 6 thing. Like I think I have actually spent time in circuit 6, but I'm a little bit at the moment taking a step back from that. And I think I have experienced circuit 8.
Can you tell us about your circuit 8 experience?
I think I'd rather not.
Oh, come on.
Come on, I talked about my mushroom trip. That's pretty embarrassing.
I know.
I didn't talk about my LSD experience, actually. That was probably a circuit 8 experience.
I've had experience. Yeah. We could start going on with experiences and drug
experiences.
And
Okay.
stuff, but
Maybe we should save that for
Yeah,
a second.
I've grazed circuit 8, but I don't think I've been there.
I've definitely had experiences where I felt like I've forgotten who I am, and sometimes it felt like I was like vibrating on a patterned realm, and sometimes it felt like I was like, or it wasn't even an I. Sometimes it felt patterned, and sometimes it felt chaotic. So I'm not sure how much it tells me about reality.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you guys for coming on this long journey through the 8 circuits with us. We hope it's been informative. We hope we can help bring some attention and cred back to this model that is definitely not gotten enough attention over the decades. And we hope you enjoyed this. If you did, check out our Patreon, like, subscribe, leave us a review, and stay tuned for our upcoming cult that we will be starting shortly.
Our next episode, we'll be talking about how to access and potentially master some of the higher circuits. So if you're interested in this subject matter, stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining us on the Multiversity. We hope you found this episode both mind-bending and enjoyable.
We can be found all over the social media space and at multiversitypodcast.com.
If you like this content, give us a like, comment, follow, share, or support us on Patreon.
Catch you on the flip side.